Okay, okay. 1:15. Let's resume. Mr. Morici, you were thinking a couple of hours plus in chief?
No, I think we'll be less. I think we'll be about an hour to an hour and a quarter.
Okay,
probably.
absolutely fine. I think nonetheless, I'm inclined to take a break at that point, and then we can move on to cross-examination with a slightly longer run-up. Absolutely fine. Any housekeeping matters from anyone? Nope. Okay, over to you, Mr. Morici.
Thank you, sir. Can you confirm you are Andrew Smith?
I am.
And you have a BSc honours degree and an MSc in Landscape Ecology Design and Management, and you're a member of the Landscape Institute and a chartered landscape architect, correct?
That's correct.
And you have close to 30 years post-qualification experience in landscape planning and design. You tell us you've prepared a number of townscape, landscape visual impact assessments, both freestanding and as part of EIAs, on a number of projects, correct?
That's also correct.
And you have experience of both national landscapes and national parks, and indeed you sit on both the South Downs National Park and the Design Southeast Design Review panels, correct?
I do, yeah.
And you have been given evidence as a witness on landscape and visual matters at numerous inquiries, correct?
That's correct.
And you were instructed to give evidence on this appeal on landscape and visual matters due to the retirement of the previous landscape architect who gave evidence at the previous inquiry, correct?
That's correct.
You explain in 1.3 of your proof that you, before accepting the instruction, read all the relevant previous application and appeal material, visited the site, that you're familiar with the site, having lived in West Sussex for many years and having passed by the appeal site on a regular commute, and that having taken the instruction, you visited the appeal site a number of times. Is that all correct?
That's all correct.
And then you give the necessary declaration at 1.5 of your proof that the evidence that you've provided is given in accordance with the guidance of your professional institution, and you confirm that the opinions expressed are your true and professional opinion.
They are, yeah.
And that applies to your written and the oral evidence you're about to give.
It does.
Thank you. Now, you've produced a proof of evidence, but what I'm going to do is simply ask you some questions based on where we now are, because we've heard a fair amount of landscape evidence over the last day and a half or so. So can I ask you, first of all, I want to ask you about where you understand us to be in terms of sort of matters of common ground, having heard the cross-examinations that have already taken place. So in terms of matters of common ground, first of all, what do you understand to be agreed matters now in relation to the baseline, so both the landscape and the visual baseline?
Thank you. So over and above those within the agreed statement of common ground, the baseline matters that we've advanced through yesterday and this morning indeed, is that Midhurst Road adjacent to the entrance is not a sunken lane, and that the road itself and the adjacent settlement edges, they are not tranquil.
Thank you. And then other matters that have come to be agreed, where are we now on design and its relationship to landscape matters?
So it's common ground now that the design is of high quality. In relation to particular aspects of that design, the lodge, it is agreed, is attractive. It was also seen as a key focal feature, another demonstration of its attractiveness. It's agreed that the design process in itself is well considered. It was agreed in the running through of the management guidelines associated with landscape area GW5 that there was a positive response to the majority of those management guidelines. In cross-examination of Mr. Petro, table 4 of my proof of evidence, where I talk through the Surrey Hills National Landscape Management Plan, was agreed all bar 2 points.
As P policies P1 and P2.
And there was total compliance with my table 3, which is within my proof of evidence, in relation to the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide.
Thank you. So that's design. That's a matter of where we are of common ground. Thirdly, in terms of where we now are on common ground, effects. So first of all, can we start with the landscape effects and where we now are?
Thank you. In relation to landscape effects, the two that lie between us still remain LCA 1 and 2. There was a slight change in terminology there where the council got to large adverse as opposed to substantial adverse. It was a correction of vocabulary on both of those two. The differences are still the differences, and my judgment is within my evidence. In relation to LCA 3, the agreed residual position on that character area from the council moved from neutral to moderate positive. In relation to LCA 4, the council moved their position. This is the residual effect I'm talking about in all instances, from low adverse to moderate positive. LCA 5, they moved from low adverse to slight benefit. And in relation to LCA 6 and LCA 7, it was already common ground between us that they were moderate positive effects.
Thank you. So that's the landscape effects and where we're agreed on those. What about visual effects? Where are we in terms of points agreed now on that?
In relation to visual effects, it was agreed that all effects would moderate beyond year 10 as a point. We got to year 15 was talked of. So further moderation primarily through the maturing of the vegetation. But table 6, I think all effects got to slight, all bar that, I think year 51 moderation. Belle Vale, they got to slight, and then Belle Vale road users went from slight adverse to slight positive. In effect, there's really now nothing between us if we run through my table 6 in relation to visual effects.
Thank you. Okay, could we move on then? I wanted to just ask you, in terms of the visual baseline, is there anything more you want to say about where we are on that and what your position is on it?
I think in relation to that, I'd just like to reiterate a couple of points, sir, if I may, in that to reiterate that the views that we are discussing are those immediately adjacent to the site. They are very local receptors, not just local receptors, very local receptors. They are from the road to the west, and then from the road to the south, so Belle Vale, Midhurst Road, and then from a limited number of localized residential receptors bordering the northern edge of the site. Those in Midhurst, along Midhurst Road, the number of receptors there already have the influence of the road, traffic noise, and we heard from one of the local residents about the traffic flows and the quantum of traffic on that road, and you'll understand the noise that arises from that. Additionally, in relation to the views, which is 3, 4, and 5, which are adjacent to the entrance, proposed entrance, we know that 2 trees have already been removed for on highway safety grounds. They were U category trees as identified in the tree survey. We actually know further than that. If you look at, and we can maybe go there later if we need to, if we look at the trees in more detail, a lot more of those trees in that grouping along that road edge are C category, which we went through yesterday, which means they have less than 10 years life expectancy. And what we do know is that trees are planted, trees grow, trees become senescent, trees die. And it's very evident that that is exactly what is occurring in that corridor. And therefore, we know that those viewpoints will change without proactive intervention. So that's a visual change that is going to occur. Again, I reiterate the point that the residual effects are all agreed as slight. And I wonder whether I could come back to Gibbet Hill. Now, Gibbet Hill isn't a matter between the council and ourselves. At paragraph 3.1 of the landscape statement of common ground, it's deemed insignificant. That's what the paragraph says in terms of the visual relationship. Now, if you have the time, so I'd ask you to go there. It's a lovely walk. You park at the National Trust car park and you walk to the end. And actually what you're drawn to is there is the memorial, the Gibbet Memorial Cross, slightly somber, but there is a cross there. There is a trig point. And if you were to look at the Ordnance Survey map, you would see one of those panoramic viewpoint signs with little blue segments. What that does is point you north. So the panoramic viewpoint is looking north, and that is the outlook that you are drawn to when you go up there. If you move slightly further south from that, turn by 180 degrees, you'll find a little, quite nice, there's some little art installations on the route there. There's carvings by local people, local sculptures. You'll find a little carving and there's a seat. And if you're there and then you face towards Hazelmere, that is the location where they haven't shown where they've taken their location from, but I'm imagining it's very similar to that location. It's 3.87 kilometers as the crow flies from the site. I've been there 3 times now, and with the naked eye, it is not something that you can discern in the way that is shown. That is why they've used 200 mil. So a standard landscape visual impact assessment, the guidance tells us you use a fixed point 50mm lens for the very reason that if you're requiring to distort something through magnification, it simply demonstrates that that vision relationship doesn't exist. So that probably closes out the point that is common ground between the two parties, but just to close out the third parties, the Rule 6's party point on that one.
Sorry, thank you. Now, turning to matters related to character and landscape character, do we need to talk about the guidelines, the GALs, I think we've called them, NID 5.3, the guidelines for designation of national landscapes?
I think, yeah, to run through a couple of points there in particular, correlated to this point, in the inspector's decision at his paragraph 110, he said there would be less landscape. Now, prior to dipping into gold, which I will go to, if you go to my proof of evidence, sir, which is NID, New Inquiry Document 5.3, and my paragraph 3.6. I refer to definitions there, and definition there at my 3.6 definition, I don't need to read it in detail, sir, but then at 3.7, the European Landscape Convention, landscape is, basically says landscape is everything. So landscape is urban fringe land, it's seascapes, it's townscapes, it's all of it, it's all encompassing. I can hear the voice of some of the officers at the National Park in particular saying that landscape is everything, and they're very passionate about this, rightly so. Because that leads us into Gould. So you have to understand that definition. So when the previous inspector at paragraph 1.10 said simply there's less landscape, that's fundamentally wrong. There's exactly the same amount of landscape, it is just different. So then we go to Gould, and we understand, sorry,
NID 5.3.
That's 5.3. We understand natural beauty. And I have gone to this again at length in my proof of evidence, and rather than going through the paragraphs in detail, sir, I can point you to them for future reference. I go through it at my paragraphs 3.41 and actually all the way through to 3.49, sir. But the point is, and we've been there a little in cross-examination of the Rule 6 about how we're told at paragraphs this is back into Gould now, 5.3, how we're told of paragraphs in effect 6.1 to 6.6 to find our way through to specifically assessing natural beauty. In both the national parks and the 8 national landscapes, it still says AONBs in here. And that 6.6, the systematic evaluation of natural beauty can be a complex exercise requiring careful assessment and judgment. Natural England has developed a list of factors in bold that have been accepted as contributing to natural beauty. It provides a practical framework for evidence base which assists in making judgments about natural beauty in a rigorous and transparent way. And then it leads us to Appendix 1 of that document. Table 3, Appendix 1. And perhaps if we go on a journey to Table 3, Appendix 1. So I have a hard copy and it's page, well, it's probably page, oddly, it doesn't number correctly because I have a page 27 and I jump to Appendix 1 and I jump back to page 25 as hard copy paginated, but it's Appendix 1. It looks like that. And the heading of that appendix is Evaluation Framework for Natural Beauty. And then if we go, we go forwards a couple of pages, we get to the factor heading of cultural heritage. We get to the example set sub-factor heading of built environment, archaeology, and designed landscapes. And then we get to the example indicator. And that reads in this instance, presence of settlements, buildings, or other structures that make a particular contribution to perceptions of natural beauty. And then just below that, it says presence of visible archaeological remains. It then says parkland or designed landscapes that provide striking features in the landscape contributing to perceptions of natural beauty. And then we're told in the third columns, examples of evidence. It tells us about landscape character assessments. Of course, we've got the tiers of landscape character assessment that are associated with the site, and of course, our own landscape character assessment that comes into place there. So it's very clear that we're told that landscape is everything. Within that everything, natural beauty is something associated with national landscapes, and national beauty has associated with it settlements, parklands, designed landscapes.
Thank you. And I think you summarised that, don't you, in I think 3.3 of your proof. It was the beginning of the section you referred us to. Yeah. And if we just note in 3.44, you make the point that there are a number of settlements that are completely overwashed by the this national landscape. Yes.
Absolutely. And perhaps if I could draw you on that page in my proof, sir. It's printed page 12. And if you look at figure 6, it says Albury Park Lodges and Arrival Drive. So landscape is all about the assemblage of elements and features. Again, this is something that's within Gould. It all tells us how you build up landscape character. You assemble features and elements to create character. So if you look at figure 6, Albury Park Lodges and Arrival Drive, that is somewhere people go to. That is somewhere that people visit. What they do is they see that gateway, they see that lodge, they drive up that driveway, and they go through a parkland, then mature trees, and at the end of that, there is a building, high quality building. So this is something that is characteristic of the Surrey Hills, and we know from Gould table that we've just been to that it is part of that natural beauty. So that image, that dialogue tells you about this. Of course, there are other places within the management plan, the statement of significance. We're told about the picturesque, we're told about settlements, and people, again, if you look at figure 4 here, you can see a number of the villages. I do talk of them in my evidence, but Albury, I've just talked about those images. If you talk about Shear, you can understand just the value attributed to these. And I would just like to jump forward to figure 10 on the next page, printed page 14, you'll see figure 10. Now, it's not listed there. That's within the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide, but that is Hambledon Village. So again, the assemblage of elements. So it's the built form, its style, the spatial arrangement of that, the boundary features, the vegetation, all create the character that progresses towards natural beauty that is characteristic of the national landscape.
Thank you. I think you also, if we go back to page 13 of your proof, just to note 3.47, you point out how many people are living within the national landscape. So that if you took an average occupancy, that would be 16,000 homes in the national landscape.
Yeah.
You also mention in 3.46, and you can see this from your figure 4, that the national landscape is edged with built form, such as Godalming, Guildford, Farnham, etc. And you can see that on the plan.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And then we're going to turn in a moment, I think, to look at the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide. But you do also make the point in 3.49, you say the positive association with built form being an inherent part of the character of the national landscape, extends to lodges and parkland. And we see this both from the GAL, but also from the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide. And you refer to 3.9, and that specifically refers to cherished design landscapes and refers to lodges. Yes,
that's correct.
Okay, so can we then turn to the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide? Do we want to go to that itself? Or is that going to be?
Well, actually, we may not need to. We can
Do it
probably
from your
go
proof.
to the proof.
Yeah.
And the reason being, I list there at 3.52, sir. These are my abstracts from that document. And each of those has an image relating to it. So I go down the list I, which is then 3.1, and 3.1 is the Shedag reference, respecting the pattern of settlements. Of course, that's done in a number of ways, and we've gone through how, in terms of the southern extent, aligns with Redcourt Lodge as the lowest extent of our site, and then we go around and Scotland's Close. So settlement pattern is respecting adjacent settlement pattern. It's in that broadest sense. And the settlement pattern is depicted in figure 11 in this document. So again, in the last 2 days, where were we with this? In cross-examination of Mr. Petro, we were taken to the watercolour and we looked across the site, and it was looking across the parkland, and then we looked back, if you can remember, sir, and we said, you can see the buildings at the back of that the bluebells to one side and there's woodland. So really it's saying, there's a good example. Figure 11, green space to the fore, houses at the back. Look at the pattern of that. The trees assimilating it into the landscape. That is where you should go when you're designing something to a very high bar. That's just one prompt. The same exercise, if we look at the use of trees, we're told the screening function of trees, scale, form, colours. So again, that tells us if you locate a site that is adjacent to mature trees that have a screening function, that's part of the positive response. Of course, we have Redcourt Woods. Now, trees at the margins of the wood, from the tree survey, we know 20 to 23 metres. So well in excess of the height of the built form that's going onto site. So visually, we'll receive that. That's why we know we'll hold the skyline with the woodland. That woodland performs that very correct, characteristic function. We could then go through 3.3, which is figure 13, complement scale, height, proportion of buildings, the harmony in relation to height and massing. Now, I understand that the built area of the site is in outline, but again, it is very evident from the iterations of the illustrative master plan that we've gone through, to the extent where we've moved buildings around, we've teased open the spaces to have wider green corridors going through them. We've thought about the arrangement buildings of the edges so that, if you like, I think the language is used quite often, but more crumbly at the edges, so we present a softer edge to the woodland margin. We've collected our buildings in a way, again, in terms of figure 13, that we complement the scale, the height, the proportion. And yes, it's in the design access statement. Yes, it's in the addendum to the design access statement. And yes, we're happy for that to be collected in a pretty tight design coding. So again, figure 13 is there. So figure 14 is really about architectural features. And in chief of Mr. Pullen, again, a bit of memory recall, but we can go there if we need to. In his presentation, he had a drawing which showed the lodge, and he had little abstracts and little arrows away from that saying door detail, dormer detail, window detail. So that's quite right. So when you get something like this, that building, we look at it, we'd say it's attractive. Of course, the council's landscape witness has said the lodge is attractive, and rightly so, because that's the level of consideration that's behind it. Then, sir, if we go to figure 15, promote contemporary architecture. Now, the scheme itself has the earth house in a location. If you're, maybe just to make us familiar with where that is, if we go to figure 35 of the proof of my proof, there is annotated illustrative master plan. And if I just hold that up to you, sir, perhaps for others' benefit, there's in that, and that is a contemporary insertion into this otherwise traditional assemblage. So again, that is what SHEDEG provides the prompt to do. So if you're going to do contemporary, do it well. Then we have figure 16, and figure 16 is boundary treatments. Of course, some of those are to be considered in more detail because of the outline nature of the application at the moment, but where we do have them along the roadside, as evident in AVR 2 and 3, and adjacent to the lodge, we've got the black metal estate railings, we've got the timber, I always call it Sussex style fencing. I know we're over the boundary in Surrey. I'm sure we can call it Surrey fencing, we're up here, but the timber cleft fencing. So again, we've considered the boundary details. And of course, we've wrapped other areas to the southwestern field. We've put new hedgerows in. And around the entrance area, we've put new hedgerows in around the car parking. So we've considered the boundaries of those features. So that's figure 16. Figure 17, native trees and shrubs. We've talked a lot about the heavy woodland landscape, but we know the quantum of trees that we're putting back in. Now, we went again in cross of Mr. Petro yesterday to 3 drawings within the design and access within my proof of evidence. And these are the submitted landscape plans. Sorry, so I will just...
Page 21 onwards.
Thank you, page 21. And the plans run figure 37 through to figure 42. Figure 37, 76 trees. Figure 39, 14 trees. You'll see that there are Betula in there and corridors. So we've got birch and then hazel around the scout facility. Figure 38, 89 trees. Figure 41, 42 plus all the scrub. So we don't know how many dozens and dozens in all the scrub. Figure 40, 100 plus, because we're taking out a coniferous silvicultural woodland and putting in a broadleaf deciduous woodland. And then figure 42, 63 trees. And then I finally took us to figure 56, which is the indicative planting strategy for the reserve matter part of the site, the outline part of the site, sorry. And that's 161 trees. And they're street trees, trees to reinforce the green corridors throughout, trees at the boundaries, trees at the arrival area. So if I now go back to my journey through design guide and 17, that's the image there that says figure 17, that's how you assimilate the built form in a characteristic way into its context. Then we have figure 18. And figure 18, the heading of the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide is, it's not my word, it's theirs, but it shouldn't say cherish, it should say cherished designed landscapes. So of course, it's entirely right that much of the southeast isn't pristine landscape. We hear through the Surrey Hills Management Plan about human intervention. A lot of that human intervention relates to agricultural forestry. But of course, the homes have been built by people. Designed landscapes have been created by people. Where designed landscapes have progressed and advanced in the right way, where they've got all of those components, all those features and elements that give that distinctive character, a designed landscape, what they're saying in this document is can be cherished. So if you can get to that point, you're that good, you're actually creating something that will be cherished. And again, they have an image there. I mean, that's a typical parkland image. It's got some sheep grazing it, and you can see how they've grazed under the tree to lift the canopy, and it's a very typical scene. Figure 19 tells us about local distinctiveness. That's about materiality. Of course, there's nothing between us about materiality. So eminently achievable and possible and right. Figure 20 is minimizing parking. Of course, even from the detailed aspects of the scheme, we considered how that you come in, it's tucked behind something, it's tucked into the landscape. So even in that first moment of detail, the words are cognizant of parking and it should be minimized. So that's what we've done. And it says there, improve the pedestrian and cycle routes under that heading of the Surrey Hills Design Guide, and increase footpath access between settlement and countryside. So again, that's what we've progressed with this scheme. And the reason I put figure 21 in, it doesn't relate to any of their criteria, but how does a scheme, as now is accepted, further assimilate beyond year 10? How does that residual effect improve? That is a picture that rightly the creators of this report, the officers at the Surrey Hills National Landscape, are proud of. It shows you just how well something can assimilate through the benefit of the trees, how scenic beauty through the species diversity, the seasonal colour, can work. So if you bear that image in your mind, figure 21, and what I'd like to do very quickly is work out which way to go in this document. So if you think of figure 21, and then if you could just jump forward, please, to figure 48 and figure 49, which is page 25. These are the outline elements of the scheme. They're artist illustrations. They're not verified views. I understand that. But the level of positivity in terms of response to guiding imagery, guiding documentations is further illustrated, in particular in relation to figure 49. So that's a run through the Surrey Hills Design Guide, and my response to that is collected at table 3.0 within my proof of evidence.
Thank you. Now you'll know there were some questions put to Mr. Pullen about whether the landscape visual impact assessment baked in the design, which obviously it does refer to, it does deal with the design, it does, if you're going to use that phrase, bake in the design. Does it deal though with the document that you've taken us through, the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide, as a way of looking at that design element?
No, so it is right that design was baked in, but it doesn't deal with this document. And actually in so dealing with this document, that really demonstrates a bar that just that little bit higher, sir, just that little bit more accurate, just that little bit tighter, a little bit better in relation to the Surrey Hills National Landscape. That's the differentiator between what was baked in and where we are now.
Thank you. Can we then move on to discuss another document that's been much debated, which is obviously the management plan. I mean, do you want to start by just telling us why, in your view, compliance with the management plan is an important aspect of your evidence?
Management plan is a document that's referred to in much guidance, and in particular, perhaps if we could go to new inquiry document 7.11. I've got to find that as well. No, it's not a problem. New inquiry document 7.11. DEFRA guidance, guidance for relevant authorities on seeking to further the purposes of protected landscapes. So the importance of the management plan, and this was a 16th December 24 document, so. And in relation to the duty, is at the end of printed page 4 of 8, for example, when seeking to further purposes, relevant authorities should consider the information contained in protected landscapes management plan. So, clear point on that. Management plans describe the natural beauty, special qualities. Now they do in themselves. And of course, we've gone to the GUL, the guidance for landscape designation. We fully understand what natural beauty means. Relevant authorities should make efforts to understand the management plan and relate their functions to it. And then I think perhaps what a relevant authority should do is a heading on page 5 of 8. And I think a bullet to go to there. So it's the second bullet. And this says, I mean, the first bullet we could run through. A relevant authority should take appropriate, reasonable and proportionate steps to explore measures which further the statutory purpose of the protected landscapes. Second bullet, as far as is reasonably practical, relevant authorities should seek to avoid harm and contribute to the conservation enhancements of natural beauty, special qualities and key characteristics of protected landscapes. So we're told quite clearly to go to such documentation, and then perhaps if I look at the fourth.
Is it the fifth bullet that you're looking for? The one that deals with planning?
Yes, so for development, thank you. Development plan making development management decisions affect the authority should seek to further purposes of protected landscape. In doing so, they should consider whether such measures can be embedded in the design of plans and proposals where reasonably practical and operationally feasible. So again, the design aspect is pulled into it. And then 6, in fact.
Page 6, is that?
No, the 6, sorry, page 6.
Page 6.
And then it says, under what a relevant authority should consider, do measures which would further the purposes align with and help to deliver the targets and objectives of the protected landscapes management plan. So a series of references and a way that we're told to walk through this and the documents we're told to use
the management plan.
So
that takes us to table 4 of your proof, where you run through compliance with the management plan. Where are we on that again?
So again, there was all bar 1 and 2.
P1 and P2.
P1 and P2 were common ground, sir.
Now, there's another document I think that we should look at here. This is NID 8.3.
Yes.
Because if you look in that DEFRA guidance, it does tell you to look at another DEFRA guidance document, which is the Protected Landscape Target and Outcomes Framework, and that's NID 8.3. So you want to take us to that?
Yeah, I have that. And if I could go through a couple of paragraphs there. So I'm at printed page 3 of 13, sir. And I'm at the bottom of the page. Yeah. And I have a heading, Protected Landscapes Achieving Their Potential. And what it says here is 2 supports. This is protected landscapes, national parks and national landscapes. But it says to support protected landscapes in meeting their huge potential for nature, climate, people, and place, we are establishing ambitious targets for national parks and national landscapes. Over the page, it has 3 goals. Now, goal 1 is thriving plants and wildlife. I won't go into depth in plants and wildlife. There's ecological evidence before you, sir, and I think that could be talked through in detail there if needs be. Goal 7, mitigating and adapting to climate change. Goal 10, enhancing beauty, heritage, and engagement with natural environments. Now, I'd like to just go into a little bit more detail on a couple of those. Over the subsequent pages, we have the thriving plants and we have target 1, target 2, and it runs us through that. Of course, we know we exceed the biodiversity net gain, well in excess of the 10%. So that journey, Mr. Jacks can demonstrate just how that's achieved by the scheme. Mitigating and adapting to climate change. Now, the 3rd paragraph under that heading is tree planting. We're not doing peat restoration, but tree planting we are. And of course, if you look at the final paragraph at the bottom of that page, of that section, sorry, for the long-term protection of our iconic landscapes, action is needed to increase their resilience. So, rightly so in relation to trees, and we're going back now, but we all understand Dutch elm disease. I think we pretty much now all understand ash dieback. I think some of us may understand oak processionary moth, but what we do know that we've got increased biosecurity in relation to tree stock and tree planting. Now, one thing that we can do to increase resilience is have an increased age range in terms of tree species. We can have an increased diversity of species, and then we can have management. Precisely what the scheme facilitates through the planting and the LEMP and the SCAMP, the SANG management plan. Another horrible abbreviation by me, sir, apologise for that. If we could turn the page, we go to a heading that's called Enhancing Beauty, Heritage and Engagement with the Natural Environment Targets. So protected landscapes are designated for their natural beauty and provide a range of health and well-being benefits and educational opportunities. Further down that paragraph, it says what the EIP was made a commitment to, but it says it also committed to reduce other barriers that prevent people from accessing green and blue spaces. We facilitate access. And physical challenges, lack of confidence, lack of information. So the walker's bothy at the arrival, we provide that very information they're seeking. And of course, through being a SANG, protected landscapes should be setting the standard for meeting this commitment, leading efforts to increase responsible access and engagement with nature. Next paragraph, it says, halfway through, it starts with to ensure that more people have the opportunity to enjoy and learn, of course, the Forest School, and of course, the Scouts. And then it says, using a range of tools, such as engaging schools, disabled facility, improving trails, and waymarking. Again, these are targets. Yes, they're ambitious, they're targets, but if they can be facilitated, the targets can be met. So that is what this document is talking us through, taking us to, sir.
So that deals, I think, with a number of the documents, the GALD, the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide, the Management Plan, the DEFRA Guidance, the DEFRA Framework. Just briefly, you mentioned this already, but there was yesterday, if you go to Mr. Petro's proof at page 9, he takes an extract from the Surrey Landscape Character Assessment, the criteria on land management, which is relevant to GW5. And I went through with him those 27 bullet points across 3 pages. I don't think we need to run through those, but just broadly, I think you said this earlier, where did we get to on those?
I can't remember 100%, but an overwhelming majority of them was a positive response.
Thank you. And then can we touch on, there's obviously the council's own landscape character assessment that was undertaken for them by AMEC, where the site falls within HE05. Is there anything you want to say about that?
I think just a small point on that is we sort of started to go through a paragraph and then lost steam in terms of re-examination. But my paragraph served my proof of evidence 4.104. Now, earlier within my evidence, and I'm entirely happy to go there if you'd like me to. So I introduced this document, I introduced the purpose of this document, I introduced the approach behind the document, and the fact that they got to a median value in their assessment across the entirety of the site. You can see at paragraph 4.101.
4.101, not 4.104. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, 4.101. That in the council study, their parcel HO5 was valued as medium. I understand that the report lacks granular assessment, and we're often asked to take a piece of data that is used for baseline evidence and then go away and do a finer grain assessment. So of course we've done that. But it would be logical that the area adjacent to the urban edge, already influenced by the urban edge, would be a lower value of those further away. So what I'm not trying to say there is the bottom bit is medium, and then I'm going to try and get the bit near the urban edge even less than that. That would be wholly wrong. But what I'm saying is I've put the bit to the lower edge as high, and I've said the bit to the urban edge is medium. So I think I've been very balanced in my judgment. I think that's right. And of course, that relates well to the previous inspector's, and I can't remember the paragraph reference, where he describes the paddocks, well, the council call them paddocks, but he describes the two fields at the top as not demonstrating or limited qualitative aspects in their landscape. And I can't remember the word he uses. I need to find that paragraph. Oh, thank you very much. So if I just go to that. Sounds as though I might be going to it again, but I'll go there. I'll go there for the first time now, if I may say.
Yeah, it's paragraph 84. So this is obviously in NID 3.8.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the wording I was fumbling to get to, so is paragraph 84. Okay.
Last 3 lines, I think.
There is, I acknowledge, little that is inherently distinctive in respect of the northern fields which form part of LCA 1 and LCA 2. WBC describes them as paddocks. So that would be consistent with my judgment, taking the AMIC work, high value to the bottom, the medium to the top.
Thank you. Now, you touched on the issue of trees, both tree losses and tree planting. Is there anything else you want to say about trees?
Actually, now having through, I've sort of, I think in relation to those, my point really is about the resilience, which we've gone to the landscape targets. Now, the trees lost to facilitate that junction will come on to the effects later and the visual effects in relation to what comes back and the AVRs. But I would like to reiterate the resilience point. And we know that the stock is of that lower category there. Without the interventions, it will further decline. So the verdant nature of that road will change. And that's we're told that by a tree survey undertaken by the appellant's arboricultural expert. So no further on.
No. Okay. So the next thing is on issues around design. You've mentioned in the beginning what you understand now to be common ground with Mr. Petro about the high quality of the design. Is there anything else you want to say about design matters following Mr. Petro's evidence?
Thank you. Yeah, there's just a couple of points, if I may, actually. As I've said, much of the southeast isn't pristine. Human intervention is very much part of the character of the landscape. Woodlands are cleared to create downlands. Woodlands are cleared to create paddocks. Homes are built. Designated landscapes are created. All of these features are accessed through some form of trackway, roadway. All of this is human intervention, but we're still able to celebrate it. So the matter really is the quality of the outcome and the relevance to context. And we have run through the quality of the outcome. So Mr. Pullen ran through it, and in his, there was a point in his design proof evidence. So in Mr. Pullen's proof of evidence, so which is CD 5.4, I can give you the paragraph reference. It's a very small point that I'm seeming to make here, but CD 5.4 at 2.2, he says, the evidence concludes that the requirements of the relevant urban design policies and guidance have been met. The layout and design of the proposals will reflect the high expectations of the Surrey Hills. He puts AONB management plan, that's what it was, and the environmental design guide. And that's right, sir. Those expectations are high, they are met. And some points within that, some perhaps the misunderstood points. So I think we heard the journey, for example, that it's now a couple of people have been on. The inspector himself didn't quite go on the journey, but Mr. Petrie did yesterday. Sort of, we had the lodge started off in sort of a bit of a woeful position. I think it was really its imposition in terms of a moment in the landscape was called a sham. We went from sham to an attractive building. Now, attractive is something that is pleasing to the senses. So if we're putting something that is pleasing to the senses into the landscape, that has to be positive. Why would something be negative if it's pleasing? More correctly, it is attractive. And we got there. We did get there. And we got to attractive in a key focal point. Further, the point on deceit, and I think this is more where sham came from, quite frankly, is that we're putting in something that is false. We're putting in an attractive building. And it's wrong that we're putting a lodge in because actually we haven't got the stately home at the end of it. Well, we discussed yesterday about how landscapes are designed, how there are moments such as this. We arrive to a site, we may go up to a big house. We don't need to go to a big house. We talked of ha-has. I know we talked of ha-has yesterday, and we said, well, they're functional because they keep the cattle out. But the reality is they keep the cattle coming in that way. But when you look out across your lawn, the idea is you have continuity of grassland. So the theme is the borrowed landscape. So the green continues on in perpetuity. That's the reason, so that bit of artifice. Now, we're creating something of very high quality. We've got this attractive building at the gateway, and actually what it signals is high quality starts here. It carries on at the arrival drive. That's what was going to be at the termination of this journey. There's no sham in that. It's a strongly designed feature of part of a parkland. It's an assemblage of elements that we discussed. And when done in the right way, it can take a journey towards the cherished. That's what a designed landscape can do. Of course, it's new. Of course, it's change. All designed landscapes are change. Prior to being a designed landscape, they were a green field. So, and we've already been to Albury and figure 6.0 in my proof at page 12. And that was the lodge. That was the arrival drive. And it's that same journey prior to them being there. They would have been a greenfield site. Perhaps the other point was on the trees. Again, the resilience on trees, but I wanted to talk through the verdant nature of the road corridor. Now, it's agreed at the point of the entrance that we're not that sunken lane. In fact, so we can go on a side, but at that particular moment, I actually wouldn't advise crossing the road. It's not safe for a site visit to go on that side of the road because of the traffic there. But the surveyors went there to take the photographs and we got the relevant permissions, but the land does drop away. So we sit above it from one side and then the land rises up to Redcourt Woods. But the inspector at his paragraph 118 said that we lose 180 metres of that verdant character. Now, I would like to go to a drawing within my proof of evidence first, which really seeks to clarify in the first instance why this is wrong, and then the AVRs in the second instance. So on printed page 27. There's a figure 57, and it's got blue and green circles on it. And I think presentationally, if you were to take those blue and green circles away, you have the same drawing. So it's in effect figure 37, which is on page 21. Now, on figure 37, you see the mature tree stock with the surveyed data, so you'll understand the canopy spreads of the mature trees. Of course, what's drawn rightly on figure 37 is the trees at a point in time when they're young. All I've done is taken similar canopy dimensions in relation to the species that we're put in there. We've got TC, Tilia cordata, Fagus sylvatica. So we've got lime, we've got beech. So those species, we understand their spreads, and we put those canopy spreads on there. So the reality is, when those, yes, there's a timescale for maturity, but the existing trees on that road, they've taken the time to get to their scale, 20, 23 meters. Yes, there's a time to get to maturity, but in the fullness of time, through proactive management, through watering those trees, the formative pruning, because we've got different stock. To the roadside, we've got CA, which is Corylus avellanus. We've got hazel. Now, hazel is something you may understand. So the coppice stools, so you coppice those on a 7-year rotation. So they're a lot thick and woody at the base, and they're a denser type tree. And then you'll have the beech tree, which have a taller point up to their canopy and their stems, and they will sit above it. So you have that layering. Now, that diagram in plan form shows you those trees at a mature canopy. So yes, it's a lot further hence, but the reality is we want to plan and give space for the trees to thrive and grow to maturity. Otherwise, what you do is you have to go in there and thin them out with a regularity that you don't need to do. This is a landscape that's being prepared for the future. So that plan form, then if we turn the page, and we go to figure 58. And that is the AVRs. Now, I'll explain these. Because the 2 trees were lost, sir, we went out and retook the baseline photograph. So you'll see the baseline 2022, and you'll see the baseline 2024. Less apparent in this one where the tree has gone, but more apparent in the other one. And then the middle image, year 1, I haven't done the year 10 of that one, but the year 1, should say year 10 actually. I haven't done the summer iteration as an AVR. So the AVR is through the technical guidance note, but the summer iteration, the adding of leaves to trees on the winter view is through photoshopping. So please read it as a photo montage, but it's pretty faithful representation of those trees. We understand the hazel to the foreground. I've explained that they're coppice, they're thicker, they're denser, they're lower, so they're frothier, if you like. And then above them, you have the other trees like the beech and what else did I say we had in there? I can't remember, the lime. So that layering will create that verdant corridor. And again, then if we look at the baseline photo on the next page, figure 59, you will see there baseline photograph 2022 and then baseline photograph 2024. You can make out where the tree has gone, sir, in that image. So the point being, if that boundary isn't replanted, isn't proactively managed, doesn't have a better species and age range, that visual porosity, that verdant character will diminish in any instance. But actually the reality is, if you see the images below and then the summer AVR, AV2 at the bottom, the summer iteration, you can see that it is the scheme achieves the outcome. So a complete loss of 180 meters of verdant character, I think that's wrong, sir.
Right. Can we turn then to please look at the issue of landscape effects more generally. We heard evidence, obviously, from Mr. Petro yesterday in relation to his consideration of landscape effects. Do you want to talk us through your position versus Mr. Petro's on landscape character effects? We've got your table 5, haven't we, in your
Yes, I've
proof,
got my
actually.
table 5, yeah.
So we might want to go to that.
Yep, you're there, so yeah. Sorry, I just want to get to. Okay. So LCA 1 and 2 lie between us. We've had the correction of vocabulary, so I think the residual effect was actually now large from Mr. Petro as opposed to substantial. But the differences are my effect is moderate to slight adverse, and he's at large adverse. And similarly, in relation to this is LCA 1, and in the bottom field, I get to slight adverse to neutral, and he's still at large adverse now, despite the fact that there is a building that is attractive, hence pleasing to the senses in there. So they're the matters that lie between us. In relation to the parkland, my judgment was slight beneficial. In Cross yesterday, Mr. Petro agreed moderate beneficial. In relation to Redcourt Woods, I had slight to moderate beneficial. In Cross, this is the residual effect. Mr. Petro got to moderate beneficial. In relation to the Southern Fields, I get to moderate beneficial. Mr. Petro got to slight beneficial, so 1 degree of difference. And then it's common ground in the statement of common ground that LCA 6 and 7, we both agree on moderate beneficial. So that's the journey we've gone on, I think, through cross-examination, Mr. Petro's effects in it, they've been further moderated. But the two that lie between us still is LCA 1 and 2.
And then obviously there are some differences between you as I think you've just outlined on the level of benefit that's derived on LCA 3 through to 7, or well, I mean, some of those there's dispute, some of them there isn't. I was going to just ask you about some aspects of that. One of the points that Mr. Petro wanted to make was that in relation to some of these, I think in particular maybe at the Southern Fields, where he only got to slight benefit and you get to moderate benefit, his point was, and this might apply more generally, that it's already high quality landscape, so you can't add that much. Can you just talk us through your position on that and what's added or not by the scheme?
Yeah, so I think what he suggested was he'd already got to high value landscape. That's his score in that table. Of course, quality is an attribute of value. I'm not sure how much joy this brings going to box 5.1 of Glivia, but maybe I go there at this point in time. So if you have Glivia to hand.
Got it in the core docs.
So box 5.1 is on page printed page 84, paragraph 5.28. Then there's box 5.1.
So have you got it at CD 8.6? Is Glivia? Yeah. Sorry, which page did you say, Mr. Smith?
It's printed page 84.
80. That's electronic 91, printed page 84. And that's box 5.1, yeah.
Okay. And we're told there about, the bullet points are there, sir, before us. So we say the intactness of the landscape and the condition of individual elements, landscape quality. But in much the same way that we're now being taken here in a couple of ways, that DEFRA guidance talks of cultural interest and wildlife. And you'll see conservation interest, the presence of features of wildlife. So we know in LCA 5, where we create wetlands, which the third parties at length have talked about the wetland character of the valley, the river Ware as it runs through the valley, the ponds and the wetland features. So, and we know from the cascade of character assessments that such features are characteristic. So what we're doing is taking really quite an ordinary field in terms of wildlife and conservation and benefits, and enhancing it, because we're putting in the wetland, the blue infrastructure and the green infrastructure. So in that way, we're able to enhance the value. And of course, it talks also there of recreation value. That's the point below conservation interests. And again, we're opening up the site for improved recreational opportunities in LCA 5. So that adds to its value. So that's the journey that we can take in LCA 5. I mean, in many ways, there's a small point between us, really. There's 1 point of grading. If you take Mr. Petra's scoring, he's got to slight beneficial, I'm at moderate beneficial. So that's the difference between us in that, but it's beneficial, and rightly so.
Yeah. And can you just, in broad terms, I mean, across LCA 3 to 7, we know that's 78% of the site. What level of benefit have we got to generally in relation to that 78% site?
Well, broadly, we're now at moderate beneficial effect.
And what kind of benefits are we talking about within those areas in broad terms?
So, I mean, the headings are the recreational benefits for the user groups. There's the vegetative benefits, ecological benefits, and these are to features such as woodland, parkland, grassland, and of course we just talked about the nature conservation aspects, nature enhancement aspects of those. We've got the educational benefits in terms of the Scout Hut and the Forest School. Again, if we go back to the DEFRA guidance, we've got the well-being benefits, their words. Those will be facilitated on site. Ecological benefits, sorry, I go back to in excess of 10%. I think we're at 24% or 35% in relation to habitat units and hedgerow units. I may have got that slightly wrong. I'm sure I can be corrected on that. Mr. Jacks will get to that. So those are the benefits broadly across that area.
And where does the additional planting come in, the number of trees that you went through earlier?
The planting is within that, but also, of course, the additional planting extends into LCA 1 and LCA 2 in terms of the reserve matter. Sorry, the outline part of the application with the tree planting strategies I showed you, sir. So even within that, there are further green interventions and benefits.
And the securing of management across the land as opposed to no management? So
the securing of management is across both in two forms of document. So we have the landscape and ecological management plan, if you like, for the top bit. And then we have the SANG management plan for the associated with the SANG area.
And in terms of where the dispute really lies between you, was the last point on landscape, but where the dispute really lies between you on LCA 1 and LCA 2, is there anything else you want to say about where we are on that at the end of all of this?
Thank you. So even where there is harm, it's agreed the lodge is attractive. It's a key focal feature. I say part of a new designed landscape. Again, trees will retain the verdant nature of the Midhurst Road corridor, a verdant nature that would diminish without significant tree planting proposed. In the areas for the homes will be of the national landscape. The positive response to the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide has been agreed. That's my table 3. Green corridors will be part of those 2 areas of development. And we know through the design addendum that the outline scheme was amended to facilitate those green corridors so that they could be retained and enhanced. We know, and we went to that image looking down on the settlement, and we went to those 2 little watercolours, that street tree planting and the peripheral planting that's there and the advanced buffer planting will allow the assimilation of the homes into their context. And this maturing of the benefits of the maturation of the vegetative features is something that it's been accepted, sees a moderation of effect in these other areas. So that's probably the key points in relation to that.
So that's landscape effects. If we come to, just to conclude on visual effects, can we go to your table 6.0, page 37?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously one point we probably should just clarify in relation to both table 5 and table 6. You were basing Mr. Petro's view on his proof from the previous inquiry, because obviously when you wrote this, you hadn't seen his proof from this inquiry, correct?
Hence where I've written not apparent
Yes.
in my table.
Yes.
That's because,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
it's now apparent.
It's now apparent, we now know. And in terms of where we got to yesterday, and we've sort of gone through this a little bit already, but when you get to the residual effect at the end,
Yeah.
the last column, I mean, you've got obviously for the residual effects either slight to negligible or neutral effects across all of those receptors, apart from, yes, I think all of those receptors. And then Mr. Petro, obviously we agreed with him that when we look at his proof, we corrected that error in his 7.1. He had either moderate or slight residual effects at his year 10, yes. But then obviously he doesn't think the mitigation will be effective to year 15. And I asked him whether at year 15 we got from moderate to slight on all of those, and his position was that we did. So what difference is there between you if he's at slight for all of these at year 15 and you're at slight to neutral at year 15? How different are you on visual effects?
There's very little difference between us. I mean, even on perhaps where one of the bigger differences is the residents of Belvale Lane. He didn't see that moderate any further than slight, interestingly. In theory, if that moderates as well in the same way that others do, that would be neutral. But he held to slight. But there's a minor degree of difference, but we're not jumping into significant effects in any instance. We're at the bottom end of the effect scale. And then in relation to Midhurst Road, that in itself, he's gone on a journey from moderate adverse to slight, and I'm at slight to negligible. So the degrees of difference are tiny between us. So the effect is limited.
Yeah. And in your proof, 4.97, page 39, you say with the balance of the residual visual effects, the overarching difference is the council do not acknowledge the virtue of good design, consistently overplay effect and underplay moderation through the maturing of vegetation. That said, they in essence do agree through agreements of the list of visual receptors that the visual change is localized to the site boundaries. That's very limited. My view is consistent with that of Sightline, and I find whilst visual harm does occur, it's very localized and in terms of assessment does not fit into an outcome that is significant. Obviously, you wrote that before, not just before Mr. Petro's proof, but before his cross-examination. Yeah. So the council now do acknowledge the good design, and they have acknowledged the moderation through the maturing of vegetation.
Hence, they rightly brought their scoring down.
Yeah. Okay. And then very finally, in terms of overall effects, how would you characterise, please, the overall effects of the scheme in landscape and visual?
So, in relation to the duty, seeking to further the purposes, yes, we see some conflict. But under the duty, and again, if we go to, well, we've gone to 7.11, but under the duty, we went to those particular paragraphs, but we've done everything we can to minimise we've progressed as far as reasonably practical. At all opportunities, we've sought to contribute to conserving and enhancing natural beauty. The first thing is understanding what natural beauty is, but we have sought to conserve and enhance natural beauty. 3 to 7, it's very clear we're there. There's nothing between us. 1 and 2, there is something between us. But actually, the reality is, if we go through the lens of the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide, we still shouldn't be at the differences that we have. Because in reality, the lodge is something that is pleasing. It is attractive. It's part of a designed landscape. We put it into parkland character, so the assemblage of elements will create that parkland that's on a journey to cherished. We provide a positive settlement edge. We've talked about that and how we sit in relation to that. And we have these positive fronts facing southwards into the retained and improved wooded edgeland. We sit below the skyline. New homes will be delivered wholly aligned with the high bar set by the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide.
Thank you. And then to conclude, can you just please read for us in your conclusions, paragraph 6.7?
Thank you. So I'll just read this through, if I may. Thank you. In essence, this is a unique set of circumstances. A site in the right location, a sustainable location, at the edge of the national landscape, next to a main settlement edge. A scheme that only proposes to develop a very small part of that site and in a discrete location. Additionally, where development is to occur, it is in itself reflective of the national landscape, meeting the high standards of the national landscape's own design guidance. Finally, it's a scheme that will be delivered in this way through a very detailed design code condition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Those are all my questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll take an early break now. Just before we do, thinking about the landscape and visual tables, well, in both proofs of evidence, there's been a certain amount of movement, a certain amount of clarification. I'm thinking particularly of, is it tables 5 and 6?
Yes, 5 and 6.
5 and 6. I have been doing my very best to make notes about any changes in wording, but I don't want to get it wrong. So,
No, joint note.
a joint note.
A joint
Yes.
table.
I mean, just picking up, if you like, tables 5 and 6 from this witness, although I don't mind where it comes from, but a joint note would help as to where we are.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there's any great significance, or lack of,
But just so you've got a record of it.
just to make sure that I've got the position as we've worked it through.
Yeah. Well, so obviously we'll do that. Obviously, we'll hear the cross-examination of Mr. Smith.
Oh, yeah,
and
and
then-
yeah. And there's no particular rush on that because I'm 99% sure that I've got a note of what changes or infillings there have been, but I want to be 100% sure from the parties, that's all.
Yeah.
Quite happy, I'm sure we could do that. I think the appropriate time to do it is probably after all the landscape evidence is.
Oh,
heard.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm happy to do it. I suspect in closings we'll set it up, but I'm more than happy for during the course of next week, we can
Yeah.
prepare a
that
note.
would- that would be
There
useful.
might be the odd need for sort of explanatory notes underneath the names, but if it helps you,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
we're-
yeah,
we'll do
it
that.
really would just reassure me that my notes are accurate, which, as I
Yeah.
say, I hope they are, but
No, that's fine.
okay, it is now 2:35. Let's take a caffeine break until 5:02, please. You know the drill very well. Yeah.
Mr. Smith, do you want coffee?
Could I have a macchiato, please?
Stuff left something behind.
Yeah.
Not that one. Need to take that one.
Quite important, yeah.
Sorry, I will start in just a moment, but one of my computers has decided to lock up completely. So I'm just rebooting it in the hope that that will encourage it a little. Ah, right. I appear to be back. It's talking to me again. Right. Sorry about that slight delay. Mr. Cosgrove, over to you.
Very much. Good afternoon, Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon.
Excuse my cough. This stage inquiry, obviously, we've looked at many of the documents. I think most of the documents we're going to need, you've had open or talked about in chief. I'll try and go at some pace, but do slow me down if we need to look at context. But I think most of the documents the inspector's looked at and understands the context. Good. So can I just start off on some points of agreement and work out where differences are, similar to what my learned friend did, but just so I'm clear, and talking about landscape character principally at first, rather than visual effects.
Okay.
So we know you and the council have agreed that for the purposes of assessment, it's useful to divide the site into LCA 1 through to 7, and you've subdivided LCA 1 for the reasons you've explained in your proof.
Yes.
And it's agreed, I think, between us in landscape effect terms that the adverse effects post-construction and with mitigation are limited to LCA 1 and 2.
That's right.
I'm not going to seek to get behind the answers Mr. Petro gave in his evidence. I may challenge the context of some documents, but I think that's where we arrived at in terms of landscape character. And the inspector's request, we're going to helpfully, I hope, produce a table to identify those differences as well. Now, so far as LCA 1 and 2 are concerned, again, I think it's agreed they cover approximately 22% of the site.
So 22% of the site is covered by built development.
Help. So is in fact LCA 1 and 2 are slightly larger than that, are they?
Yes.
That's helpful. But I picked up somewhere, and it may be that either relates to the 22% or LCA 1 and 2 are about 5 hectares. And
The built aspect is
aspect.
5.09.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
And it's the green infrastructure plan is what gets us to that.
Yeah,
point.
that's great. Thank you. That's probably me not having picked that up more accurately. So 5 hectares are a built development. And there's been a little bit of evidence about whether the site is large or not. And but we can perhaps assist the inspector in this way. It's a matter of agreement between the appellant and the council that the site, the proposal is a major development quote in NPPF terms, and that has a slightly different meaning in this sense. For the inspector's notes, I'm sure he knows that's defined in para 67 of the latest version of the NPPF to be whether a proposal is a major development, a matter for the decision maker, taking into account its nature, scale and setting, and whether it could have a significant adverse impact on the purposes for which the area has been designated or defined. So that's a test, as it were, that the parties agree is met so far as characterising the scheme as major.
I believe major development test is agreed, and Mr. Collins picks that up within his evidence.
Yes, I think it's in the statement of common ground, actually.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. So in terms of matters of disagreement, in terms of landscape character in particular, your useful table 5, page 35 of your proof, we've all probably been scribbling little updates. There'll be a smarter one coming, but working from that as best we can at the moment. Let's just look at some matters there. When one looks at this table, just so I'm clear, that when you have residual effect, do I take that to be 15 years effectively and beyond?
No, we're year 10.
Yeah, that's year 10. Ah, okay. Because some of the concessions, as you fairly described for Mr. Petro, were on the basis of going to year 15, weren't they? Do you remember?
Right, so ours is commensurate with the AVRs.
Yeah.
The AVRs have a year 10.
Yes.
Year 10 informs that, but of course, the journey.
Yeah.
It demonstrates that journey in those
Hmm.
period of year 15 to year 10, of course, it moderates, and beyond
Yes.
year 15, it moderates even
Okay.
further. So it further improves.
No, that's fine. And that's no something that I know that you could pick up with Mr. Petro in the table, that perhaps it's now useful to have a year 10 and year 15 because
That's
some of his concessions were year 15 rather than year 10.
That's a fair comment.
And that's helpful. Thank you. Good. And in terms of your methodology, I think you've helpfully indicated in your proof, section 3, we can go to what you broadly accepted the methodology in the LVIA,
It's common ground.
the set line, yeah. And the terminology you use reflects that as explained in the LVIA somewhere, that the large, moderate, that slight, that phraseology is, again, part of that methodology, isn't it, that you use?
It's part of the methodology.
Yeah.
The words in there is the, so Mr. McDermott's LVIA chapter.
Yes.
And in fact, the matrices that Mr. Petro and Mr. McDermott, their matrices, we shouldn't depend upon matrices, are broadly equivalent. Just
Yes.
some of the language is slightly different. That's all.
Yes, but just so I understand, the language you use, in your assessments, seemed to me to be the same, as it were, scale and grading as is used in the LVIA.
Yes.
So there's, I can't remember where there's a bit in there which explains what is meant by large or moderate, if one really wants to go there.
Yes,
But
there
you're
is.
using the same meaning. So you may have had a different meaning somewhere, but that's fine. That's helpful. Thank you very much. Now, in terms of the differences then, if we just look at your table and LCA1, as you've broken it down to looking at the top northern field part of it,
Yeah.
you conclude at year 1 in terms of effects, a large to moderate adverse effect. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
So again, if we need to, we can go to the table. That in as described in the LVIA, that would include an effect that's, quote, a very important adverse effect, likely be important in decision making.
You're reading large there, are you, as opposed to large to moderate?
Yes, that's large.
Yeah, so,
Yes,
yeah, but so as opposed to large to moderate.
yes, okay. So it's
the
large.
the range there, so it
Right.
sits between the two. It doesn't sit in large, it's
No.
large to moderate, so it's
Okay.
less than large.
Right, I see. Okay. And then moderate to slight as your residual year 10 effect, contrasted with what Mr. Petro has recorded, substantial or large,
Now
as it's
large,
amended,
yeah.
using his.
That was one of my scribbles. that
Yes,
I'm gonna
exactly.
collect, yeah.
Yeah, and so quite a difference for the inspector to grapple with there,
Yeah.
and form his own judgment. Of course, he might disagree with both of you, I suppose, and come to his own view.
He could do.
And your judgment, just from my notes, and Inspector may or may not find this useful, but does also differ from the LVIA finding, doesn't it? Because the LVIA, so Sightline or Mr. McDermott, concluded there was a residual moderate to large adverse effect in this area, didn't it? Are you aware of that?
Bear with me, I'm just going to find what his assessment was.
Well, I can tell you.
Could we go to it? Is that okay?
Well, we can go to it. I mean, you recall that in your proof. So should we go to your proof, and then if you want to go further, I can give you the reference, Neil.
Yeah.
But I think I noted that, you tell me if I'm wrong, 4.45
5.
of your proof.
Sightline's residual effect was moderate to large at
Yes.
first. So I get to
You get slight.
moderate to slight.
You get slight.
So I explain the difference there.
Sorry, you get moderate slight. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you do explain the difference. But I'm going to come. I want to work out what the differences are, and then I'm going to come back in some depth and we'll look at that. But so there is a difference, isn't there? And it's a material difference as between you and Sightline in terms of the residual
But there's a
assessment.
difference between, and it's explained at paragraph 4.45.
No, I understand that. I just want to just a simple yes or
So
no.
yes, there's a difference.
Yes, thank
and
you.
Elaboration, it's at paragraph
Yeah,
4.45.
we'll come on to that, I promise you. But what I'm putting to you is that difference in assessment terms is a material one. The difference between
That's
moderate to large and what you assess as moderate to slight is a
I've
material
agreed the
one.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is still evidence, the LVIA, the appellant has puts before this inquiry for the inspector to look at and consider, isn't it?
It's part of the bundle of evidence, yes.
Yeah, it hasn't sought to withdraw that or tell the inspector, don't look at that evidence.
But we're depending upon my evidence as we go into this inquiry.
Yes, okay, right. Inspector's still got to look and consider the LVI, hasn't he, and see what judgments it makes.
He can, but then he needs to read it in
Well,
conjunction with this.
He's got to, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Yes, he has, absolutely. I'm not saying he can ignore your evidence. He's got to grapple with your evidence and see what the differences are. So there, so you differ both from Mr. Petra and from Sightline, Mr. McDermott, same thing, the LVIA in terms of your assessment of adverse impacts, although you're all agreed there's a level of adverse impacts. Now, can I just pick up one point? We're going to go, I can deal with it a number of places, but it's really a point of, I suppose, approach. And it relates, I think, to the GAL document you looked at various stages. Let me put it this way. Can I start off with just a basic point of principle? I know you know this, I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but when one's looking at these kind of assessments, one first of all has got to look at the baseline, as we've all agreed, either in landscape or visual terms.
Yes.
And Glivia sets this out clearly, so I suspect I'm boring everyone already. But for landscape terms, it's what we're interested in terms of the baseline is an understanding of the character of the area to be affected by the development.
Both the site itself
Yeah.
and the context, the
Yes,
contextual area.
but principally in terms of effects. We go to Glivia.
Both.
Okay, should we go to Glivia? Let's just turn up Glivia then. Page 32. Baseline studies, para 315. Bullet 1. For the landscape baseline, the aim is to provide an understanding of the landscape in the area that may be affected by either its constituent elements, its character, and the way this varies spatially, its geographic extent, its history, its condition, the way the landscape is experienced, and the value attached to it. And it's sort of week one in landscape school, frankly, isn't it? It's you're looking at the landscape of the site. And in this, we've got quite a large site here, we've got several hectares of land. You've in fact been able to break it down into 7 sub areas to assess.
So of the area is the point. So
Yeah.
if we say, let's go back to that and understand the landscape in the area.
Yeah.
That may be affected. So of course, you have to understand the area isn't just the site itself. So we don't just stand at the northern boundary and look south.
Mm.
We have to understand the area. And
Yes.
the area to the north has 1960s built form. It has the main settlement edge of
Yes,
Hazelwood.
yes.
So that's why context is important.
Yes.
But it will be wrong, of course,
Yeah.
to take negative precedent. You would take positive precedent.
Context. Sorry, I don't.
Context.
Forgive me, cutting across
Yeah,
you.
context. No, that's fine. Point's made.
Context, of course, is important, but context goes to assessing and as an input into what the effect is on the landscape character area itself that the development is on. That's why context is important. And that is why you, quite fairly, have agreed to break down the appeal site into particular landscape character areas which you assess and you assess against. It's their character as a baseline we're interested in.
So as we went through in relation to the HEO5 document effect, it's that granular point, isn't it? What we do is we look at a broader study, we go through the cascades, we always do.
Well-
We go through the cascades from the national character assessments down to the county character assessments,
Yeah, I
down
know
to the
that.
local assessments, down to the site assessments. So we do that
Yeah.
cascade, but we look all through those cascades.
Yeah.
So in the same way, if I just go back to the baseline, I remember at length, and in Mr. Petro's evidence, he took us to GW5 and the management guidelines. So in the same way that you look at the site level, of course, day one, landscape school, you look at the cascade, and GW5 isn't just the site, it's the wider area.
Yes. And so that I feel free to say all that, but my question to you was, in the end, what we're assessing the effects on what's been identified at the baseline, which is the character of the appeal site. We vary from case to case. That is what the inspector has got to look at. He can understand it in context. He can understand how it fits into the larger area. But it's the character, if any, and what
And
character
its
qualities it
contextual
has,
landscape.
which he compares and sees if there's harm against.
And the
Yeah.
contextual landscape.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe there's a slight difference there, and I can make
Well, we get
submissions
to-
on that.
Sorry, if I come back. So yes, we have to understand the site. Yes, we have to understand the context, because of course we get to another point of common ground that we don't affect the setting of the national park.
Yes.
Okay, so
I'm
that's not
yeah.
the site.
I'm not asking you about
That's
the national
no,
park.
but you're asking me about the context and the site. So I'm saying we have to do both.
Yeah.
We can't just look at the site.
Okay, I've made my point. Maybe there's a difference between this. I can deal with that by way of submission from there on.
Okay.
Now, here, what is agreed, I think, we have a number of particular individual landscape receptors identified, broken down into LCA 1 to 7, which both you and others have assessed in terms of their particular character and qualities and so forth. Yeah, and that's effectively the most fine-grained baseline we have come through the cascade, but we end up at LCA 1 to 7.
Yeah, we go a
All
little
right.
finer into
Yeah.
their
All right.
character areas. We go a little finer into, I talked earlier in terms of features and elements. So we do,
All right.
that's the finest point of assessment. So we talk about a woodland.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, it may be because I think a lot of I'm going to suggest in due course and in submissions, no doubt we'll have a debate. There's a real different, perhaps a little difference of approach of how we get to the differences. But what I'm really suggesting is the inspector broadly in his judgments, hearing your evidence, has got to assess on what's happening to the character of the site as he assesses it and whether what's proposed is going to harm that character or not. Now, if we look at GAL, just a little digression, we could come to at any point, but just wanted to perhaps goes to this point of approach. GAL was ID 5.3, wasn't it, that you took us to?
Yes.
And again, I know the inspectors looked at it. We all want to try and get home. I think we know that I won't go through all the nuts and bolts of it with you. But in general terms, that is a document, can I put to you, that's really addressed at and looking towards what may in the future be designated and criteria for whether some part of land in the future may or may not be designated, drafted by Natural England. That's its purpose. It's looking ahead.
Yeah, it's for assessing landscapes for designations.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
It tells you what to look for in a designated landscape. So
Looking ahead.
what would be the right attributes for a designated landscape?
Exactly. Now, one of the points you make, which is not in dispute with us, and I think it's pretty obvious, but you make the point that landscape include a number of things. It might even include buildings landscape. Particular character of a national landscape might have buildings in, and we can assess what that does in terms of quality. And you make the point that, well, when you're looking ahead and when Natural England's deciding whether to assess an area, you might look at some areas that have built development in and ask yourself whether, I think you said, there's a particular contribution to the natural beauty. It's one of the tests that's set out there. Yeah?
I'm not looking ahead. I'm saying that it is, this tells us that actually the inclusion of built form, we've gone through this at length through the appendices, actually is natural beauty. That's the difference. I'm not looking ahead to what it might be, how you designate something natural beauty.
Well, it might be.
It is.
It might be. Well, not all built developments natural beauty.
No, absolutely. No, but we're agreed on that.
Developer's dream.
No, we're agreed on that.
No,
and I said in chief that the right development, it's about the right development
and
to get to natural beauty.
Yeah, and it's no, and we'll come on to no one actually keep saying at this inquiry, Mr. Petro now agrees the design's good. He's never disagreed. The council never disagreed. You could have a good design here. It's been baked into your own LVA, IA, but that no one's suggesting that your proposal, your access road up the tarmac road up the hill to provide access to 110 houses and so forth is going to be, quote, a particular contribution to the natural beauty of this part of the natural landscape. I mean, even you're not suggesting that with great respect, are you?
We've gone through this and I went through this in chief.
Well, could you say yes or no and then caveat?
So I am saying there are components of what creating actually can, I've said. And
Could you say yes or?
Yes, so the cherished landscape point, so yes, the lodge,
Right.
the parkland through which it passes, the quality of that is such that we know it's going to be attractive, pleasing to the senses. We've got that agreed.
Really? Oh, no.
Well, no, that's not my words. That's your witness's words. Okay, so I'm saying yes, and that's the point. I'm balancing the positives against the adverse. That's the exercise I go through repeatedly in my judgments.
Certainly not opposition. I haven't understood your evidence to be that, for example, the 110 housings, the residential character we'll look at what the LVI says about it in a moment, that will be created, the urban environment is, quote, will be a particular contribution to the natural beauty of the natural landscape. That's not your case,
I'll just go through more slowly again.
Well, could you answer yes or no to that
So
and then
not the
caveat?
houses, my case on the houses,
Right.
if we go back again, and I've said this already, is that meet the SHEDEG and all of the criteria in SHEDEG, Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide and all of its criteria. And that has been agreed by Mr. Petro in agreeing to my table 3.0. What I've said in relation to the arrival sequence is a different matter. And I have talked about the parkland, the designed landscape, the attractive lodge. And I've said that in itself, attractive, pleasing to the senses. So we can get to some positive outcomes in that relation to that.
Yeah.
The differences between the two.
But you'll put us, I mean, look, you keep focusing on the lodge, I understand why, but let's just take it in stages then. So far as the housing on the top, the major part of the housing, we're agreed then that wouldn't be something that, were it not in a national landscape, Natural England would come along, look at Gowd and say, oh, we better designate that because that housing development makes a particular contribution to natural beauty. You're not suggesting that, are you?
That's not the way I'm using the document,
Right.
but I'm saying that built form can in itself be part of natural beauty.
yes, you're
and that
not-
we're told that.
Yes, I know historic buildings have been in the landscape for hundreds of years. I get that, but I'm putting to you, I hope about fifth time now, I think it's fair for me to ask it. You're not suggesting, I haven't seen it in your evidence, that housing development, it makes a particular contribution or would in the future make a particular contribution to natural beauty such that it should be designated.
I'm saying it's to be within, it's a characteristic of its receiving landscape once it's built. That's what I'm saying.
Different point.
But
I mean, you cannot
but
answer my
but I
question.
get-
If I can interject, about 5 questions ago, I made a note, roadway and housing hyphen particular contribution to natural beauty, question mark.
Yeah.
That is, I understood the question, and I don't think I've had a reply to that.
Sorry, sir.
So,
So
roadway and housing,
yes.
particular contribution to natural beauty.
So yes,
Right.
as that set piece designed landscape and journey towards cherished landscape.
Really?
Sorry, is that?
Okay. Where do you say in your proof it makes a particular contribution to natural beauty as opposed to being part of the characteristics? Where does that make
So,
that particular special quality?
I don't, that exact
Yeah.
phrase, I don't say it, but I
Right,
say the
okay.
journey towards a cherished landscape in accordance with SHEDEG.
Okay, all right,
And I can go to that paragraph if you like.
that's fine. So that is, to be clear, an issue between us. And going back to Gold, I mean, what I'm really putting to you in relation to Gold, I'm going to suggest it's not really going to assist the inspector because it's looking at the future, what might be designated, not what's proposed now. And it's a world away from what actually the correct exercise the inspector has to do here, which is to look what exists on the site, the character he's faced with, see what, if any, he thinks, what qualities it has, what assessment it is, the SMB do, and then see whether what's proposed harms or benefits that existing character, which is an undeveloped greenfield site. We can argue about the particular characteristics in a minute. That's the exercise he's got to do in landscape terms, hasn't he, for the purposes of the policy? Yeah?
Sorry, could you go through that again?
Sure.
Sorry, I was
What
just
the
slightly
exercise, I'm going to suggest what the inspector has to do to understand what the baseline, what the character and quality is of the landscape development is proposed upon, viewed in context, if you like, and decide whether what is proposed is going to cause any adverse effects or benefits in landscape, for present purposes, landscape character terms, to that existing character that he assessed, which is, put it neutrally, undeveloped greenfield land at the moment. That's what he's got to do.
He's got to assess that.
Okay, that's the challenge, because otherwise, of course, you see, if one just had the proposition that a national landscape or a national park had a character of, scattered villages or lodge houses all around, you can find them, of course you can. But if you've got a particular area that has a character of undeveloped greenfield land within it with characteristics, it's no answer just to say, well, I can find an example of this somewhere else in the national park, and therefore if I put it there, it won't be any harm. That's missing the point of what the existing character of the site is. Do you see the distinction? It may be me being particularly stupid, but that's the distinction, isn't it?
I'm sure it's not. It's very much the case you have to do both.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And so in Gowl, and just pick up a couple of points, perhaps we don't have to go to it again, famous last words. If we look within Gowl, if you just go to section 6 section 6, in particular PDF electronic page 15, there's a section within section 6, and this is a part, I think section 6, to give it context, is factors. It's dealt with the factors relating to natural beauty at 6.8 and 6.9 on page 13, hard copy, and then which I can make submissions on. We've got all those set out there. Then it goes down to highlight some points at 610 on application. And at 610, it makes a number of points about the application of natural beauty criterion. And you see the fourth bullet point. Do you with me? 610.
I'm with you, yeah.
Natural beauty is assessed in terms of the current landscape, not some future potential for improvement. So even in the world where one's looking ahead at designation, the principal purpose of it is to look what's there now, to make sense, see what the character of that is. And footnote 12 explains why that's the case. Then it goes on, to be fair to you, the rest of that bullet point says a rare exception may, however, apply where an existing initiative will deliver positive change of a standard which will meet the natural beauty criterion within the short term and for which there's a high degree of certainty that it will be achieved. So are you saying you're within that second part of that bullet or not? I just want to understand where we are.
I see the point about the future potential there, but I do say I get the way that sentence starts with rare exception, but if I go to the tail end of that sentence, the standard of change which will meet the natural beauty criterion. So that's where I'm sitting, and I think that's right.
Right. Okay.
So sorry, then at 6.11.
Yeah.
It's again, if we are to understand character, it does, and I'm just understanding character here. It does say 6.11 final sentence. It is recognised that many settlements have cultural, geological heritage qualities that can make a positive contribution.
They're there already in the landscape.
I understand they're already in the landscape, but what it says is, if we are then told through the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide just how, in terms of those elements and features, are assembled correctly, and that's their guidance, and they're saying they are the bits that are revered, it follows logically that we can get to that high quality design and the bar is up there. So those components are on that journey to being very characteristic of the receiving landscape.
I'll come on.
Even different, even if they're different. And I know there's we're going to probably have a paragraph 5.37 moment at some stage in this journey, but we'll see.
Whatever that means, probably. But look, I'm going to come on to that design guide. But really, the point I'm putting to you in relation to this document, just to be clear, I don't think it's relevant. I think it's going to assist the inspector as looking forward for a different process entirely. So far as even if one's using it, it's making the point that what you've got to do when you're assessing natural beauty is look what's there now and assess it, not look at what could be there, what's coming and see it. That's not how designation works. Frankly, not that designation is irrelevant. We're going to assist this inspector at all anyway. So there are layers of it, but I just wanted to put those points to you because that's what I'm going to be making submissions on. Okay. And I understand you disagree, and I understand why. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So hopefully, who knows? Though famous last words. We won't get back to that. But that's perhaps one of the underpinning differences between us. Now, I was going through some of the difference. We have a difference then on LCA 1 to the top between you, Mr. Petro, and certainly Sightline at year 1 in any event, and in fact at residual stage as well. Now, in terms of the bottom western part of LCA 1, on your table 5, this includes obviously the access and the lodge and all that kind of stuff and the road. You conclude, looking at your table in terms of year 1 effect, slight adverse, and then you residual slight adverse to neutral, whereas Mr. Petro substantial or large adverse, and again at the same at residual. So again, one of the areas where there's a great deal of difference between you.
And Sightline is slight.
Yeah. Sorry.
So little difference between Sightline and myself.
Oh, you're ahead of me. I haven't got that. I think you do differ from Sightline again here, though, don't you?
Yeah, it's slight, but I'm slight to neutral. So a minor degree of difference between the two of us.
No, actually, because
Residual?
no, the difference here between you, and I think it is an important one again, where you take a different view from your own evidence in the LVIA, is that Sightline at the initial year 1 effect assesses this large adverse.
I was talking about residual.
Oh well, I'm talking about year 1 effect, large adverse.
Okay, well I'm not. I'm talking about.
Yeah, well,
sorry,
luckily I'm deciding what we're talking about for present purposes. So LCA 1 bottom, can I put to you the difference is you say slight adverse, but Sightline says large adverse, right?
So where do we get? Can we just go to that, please?
Yeah, sure. Okay, is that fine? But you're not aware of that? And
No, I'd just like to go to it.
of course you can. Right. So let's go, so if we go into the LVIA,
Yeah.
which is CD 2.29, 2.29, sorry, forgive me.
Yeah, I'm there.
And it's within, so it's PDF, I think, page 46, and it's within, I think the numbering's 10, and it's 10.5.33. Have I got that wrong? I probably have got that wrong.
Yeah.
I have got that wrong.
No, effect on the landscape character of the southwestern field and the setting of Midhurst Road.
Yeah. So yes, 10.5533. So yes, the context is absolutely there. Cottage will be built. I think the cottage they're referring to the lodge probably there, aren't they?
So cottage in a vernacular style, blah, 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 blah.
Is that the
blah.
lodge? Must be.
Yeah, yeah.
Set against woodland, the sensitivity of the landscape character of the field is considered to be high, and the magnitude of change will be high, resulting in a large adverse effect on its current character. And then
So
it goes on.
10.5.33.
Yeah.
So then we get to slight adverse. If taken into account the perceived harm to the landscape character is
Yeah.
considered to be slight adverse.
Yes, but what I'm putting is the initial stage.
Oh, sorry.
He's going on and taking into account design, and I'll come on to that. He's looking ahead.
Yeah.
Right. Believe me, I don't agree with what the LVI says, but I'm just trying to at the moment point out where you
So-
differ. But
sorry.
what he's doing, I think, and I hope I'm not being unfair to you, and there's a record of this in the closings from last time being conceded anyway by Mr. McDermott. But 10.533, he's identifying sensitivity of this part of the site high, magnitude of change high, resulting, he says, in a large adverse effect on its current character. Now, maybe there's a dispute between us. I'm suggesting to what the inspector's got to do principally is look at the current character and see what the effect of this proposal will be on, rather than look ahead and see what the design will do. But that we come on to that. But it's fair to say he's recording that, isn't he, to the reader as being a large adverse effect on current character. That's the result of it at the operation at the completion stage.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he is, but the residual stage is where, sorry, my confusion was we both get to, we're slight neutral at the residual stage. So that's
well,
where, that was my confusion.
No,
So
that's
apologies.
absolutely fine. Look, these tables are a nightmarish thing to have.
We
to go
get there
through
in
and
our
cross compare.
journey, we get there.
But it is fair then, isn't for me to recall that there is a difference again. We'll come on to why. I think there's an answer to why there's a difference in due course, but there is again a material difference between your assessment of slight adverse and Sightline, the LVIA's assessment to the decision maker of large adverse.
At that year
year
one,
one.
but not at the residual effect.
Sure, and look, maybe we deal with this point now because sometimes, and it's not just appellants, other people do it as well. I act for lots of appellants. The decision makers not just leaping ahead to year 15 and year 10 to see what the effect is. One's got to consider what the initial effect be on the landscape and visual receptors, and of course there will be a gradation over the ensuing years. I mean, some people may not be around in 15 years' time. So 15 years or 10 years is a long period of time before which one would have to, in theory, experience, if there are adverse visual landscape effects. So it is immaterial, isn't it, to identify what the effects will be at completion as well as further down. Is that fair?
It's part of the explanation. So Glivia asks us to be discursive, so that's right. But
Yeah.
the residual effect is the outcome
Yeah.
the scheme is designed towards.
Of course, but so so there is a difference again on that between you, I think, fairly between
Yeah.
appellant you and the LVIA. All right. Now there are some differences within this table as between value and susceptibility to some extent. I don't know how material, and I think they're explained. I'll come on to it by the way you approach the judgments. But in the end, so far as LCA 1 and 2 are concerned, there is a large measure of agreement between you as to sensitivity, isn't there, that the inspector will see in the landscape table. I think the only difference is that at LCA 1, the bottom, you say high to medium, as opposed to high.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
correct.
So,
that's
you know-
between myself and Mr. Petro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So fascinating as it may be to look at value and susceptibility, because the combination of them give us a sensitivity.
Correct.
In a sense, would it be fair to say inspector might want to focus on sensitivity and then, of course, magnitude of effect and then effects?
In effect, that's right, sir. If you
Yeah.
use the springboard to the next stage, sensitivity,
Yeah.
and then go forwards.
Thank you. That's helpful. That saved us 20 minutes. All right, thank you. Something. Good. Thank you. Now, just to LCA 2, the northern fields. Again, you say year one effect large to moderate adverse, so similar to Mr. Petro in you say moderate, but he's large, so there is a difference, but you're both reporting material adverse effects at year one, is that right?
That's correct.
And again, you differ again from the LVIA, don't you, here? They certainly, so far as the residual effect is concerned, because you report moderate to slight and Sightline conclude moderate to large residual effects at year 10. Is that right? Again, if we want to go to the reference, we can. Do you want to go to the reference? The difference is in the residual. Sightline conclude a residual moderate to large adverse effect, and I think you, Mr. Smith, moderate to slight. So worth recording because there is a difference, and of course you differ from Mr. Petro as well.
Yes, I do from Mr. Petro. Of course, the difficulty here.
Do you want to? Shall I take you to the reference? So
yes, please. But the difficulty here is that the LVIA didn't assess a table against the landscape character areas. It talked about attributes within the site.
Yes. Well, no.
So,
just as my learned friend, we go to ID. Well, that's going ID 2.3, which is the Mr. McDermott's evidence last time, and my learned friend took you to it, I think, a bit earlier and referred to it as the LVIA. I think technically it's his evidence, but so ID, I think, so I get that. So I hadn't.
2.3 it is, yeah.
2.3, so we're going to go here. Let me just 2.3,
And the diagram on page 12, figure 8.
No, sorry, it's what I'm sure there may be lots of ones. What I wanted to go is to the appendices. So in my electronic version, it's part 3 of ID 2.3. It's an appendix 2 of that evidence, and it's at page, as it's numbered on the bottom, 1091. Or my wording is correct. Don't want to waste too much time on it, we can always find out and tell the inspector later. But we're looking at the appendices to Mr. McDermott's proof. You're there. You're well ahead of me. I'm still my
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, it's 10. I think my note was appendix 2, 1091. Yes, I'm there now. Forgive me. And 1091, there is you're ahead of me, Mr. Smith. There is a table, and this is dealing with landscape. I think it's dealing with the whole thing, actually.
It does.
He does it with both. But from my memory, I didn't know we'd be going there. There's a table where he deals with landscape effects of the northern fields.
So yes, it doesn't describe LCA 1 to 7 in there in the table.
No, it doesn't.
And it doesn't talk about year 1. It does mitigation and residual effect. So it doesn't do year 1 to 10.
Ah, okay. So forgive me. We're on the right place. We're looking at the landscape character of the northern fields on 1091, actually, isn't it? I got the
Yes,
right one.
but my judgment is against the character areas. Okay, and so these are slightly different. There's a subtlety in there in reality. So but
help
I
me.
have done my table to accord with Mr. Petro's table based on the data that I have, so that for the convenience of the inspector,
Yes.
that we're comparing like with like, because that came through in the preparation of the statement of common ground is how we got to common tables, and I had prepared on that basis this table.
Yes.
So they're broadly aligned, but we need to be.
Yes.
You said he divided it down to LCA 1 to 7, and you'd seen it.
No, forgive me if I said that.
Worried about my memory, but I hadn't seen that.
I wasn't at the last inquiry, but I'd understood these character areas were agreed at the last inquiry.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm wrong in that regard. I thought there was LCA 1 to 7, but in any way, what's said here, maybe there is a difference, but he does refer to the landscape character of the northern fields, and maybe that's a similar area to what's described as northern fields in LCA 2.
That's LCA 1 and 2 at the top, but it isn't the difficult.
Oh, it isn't that. I'm with you.
Yeah,
So,
you see
okay.
what I'm saying? Sorry.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
But in any event, there's a difference, isn't there? Because we can take that on board, but his residual effect is moderate to large adverse effect, which.
For the top piece,
yeah.
yes. So there's the difference between us at
Yeah.
that residual stage, yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Right now, so I mean, we've gone through quite a lot of detail, but it's fair to record, isn't it? They are one accepts matters of professional judgment at the end of the day.
Yes.
But you do differ to some extent, and I'm going to suggest material respects from both Sightline and from Mr. Petro, so far as LCA 1 and 2 are concerned, in terms of landscape character effects, don't you?
I do differ,
Yeah.
yes.
Now, and quite unusual, I suppose, tell me if I'm wrong, for the appellant to have an LVIA which differs from the witness in terms of effects it relies on for landscape character.
No, in terms of,
Yeah.
it's my judgment with the data that I have. I take forward all the judgment there, and that was in my introduction, but it
Yeah.
described precisely what I've done in
Yeah,
preparation.
no, absolutely. And then just quickly, so far as the others, we're going to come back and look at the LCA 1 and 2 in much more detail, I'm afraid. But LCA 3, again, much less difference here. You say neutral moving to slight beneficial at year 10. That's your evidence. And just to give, again, because you've helpfully confirmed, when one inspector sees in your evidence slight beneficial and wants to get a feel of what you mean, what you want him to do with a finding, we hopefully agree that it's what the LVI, and we can go to the reference, but slight beneficial in terms of the LVI methodology means a slight benefit or slight adverse effect not considered to be important considerations, and even multiple effects are not considered to be cumulative material in the decision-making process.
That's what's like, but again, we've now got to the point with Mr. Petro of moderate beneficial in relation to that one.
Well,
So-
but your evidence is
No, I'm agreeing with that. Yes, that's what it says there, slight, but now Mr. Petro's at moderate beneficial, so
I know
it's.
what Mr. Petro said. I just want to understand your evidence. That's your.
No,
claim.
I've said yes to mine of slight, and
Yeah.
you've described what it means through the description in the
So
methodology.
but that's right, and that's how I'm to confirm with you when I make submissions. You're not reporting to the inspector that kind of finding.
No, I've been precautionary.
Quite right. It's not really going to, in the decision-making process, even cumulative with other slight beneficials, going to make much of a difference.
It goes, what I've reported there is slight beneficial. That's what's in front of us.
Right. Good, thank you. And again, perhaps to take it a bit more quickly in light of those answers, there's a range the inspector can see in relation to other ones, some slight LCA 4, some moderate beneficial for 5, 6 and 7. And even, again, perhaps we don't need to look at it in detail now, but just to put it to you, one looks what moderate means in your LVIA. That generally means something, a finding that's, quote, unlikely to be critical of a decision-making process.
Let's just go to the definition of moderate in here, please.
Right. Where do you want to look at it, in the LVIA?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so I think it's table 10.10 in CD 2.2.
Table 10.10.
I think so, in
Page
2.29.
1013
Absolutely, you're ahead of me again.
in
It's on the table.
2.29.
And I think, so we're looking at moderate, beneficial, adverse. These
Yeah.
beneficial or adverse effects may be raised as local factors. They are unlikely to be critical in the decision-making process, but are important in enhancing the subsequent design of the project.
Yeah, and then you concluded by saying not a significant effect, but if I go on to read the second sentence,
Yeah.
the identification of multiple and moderate effects may be a material consideration in the decision-making process and
Yeah,
therefore a significant
absolutely,
effect. So
absolutely.
of course, we've got multiple moderate effects.
Yeah,
So
well, you've
just
got-
that distinction, that's all.
Yeah,
It's
but
small matter.
in
to us.
principle, an absolute fair point.
Yeah.
But in principle, just to give a gauge, you've been around, I've seen other assessments where moderate means a lot more than that, but that's the way it's described in this particular LVIA.
They all
right?
vary, that's in
And so that's why the inspector needs to have,
interpretation of Livia.
get a gauge on your calibration, what exactly you have in mind when you say slight or moderate. Okay, thank you very much. Now, just a small point, 4.41 of your evidence, you say my assessment of landscape and visual effects is explained in both tabulated and discursive on the table provides my judgments on value susceptibility, so forth. The table is inclusive of differences between my judgments, sight lines, and Petro Harley. Now, I don't think your table, as it happens, actually does set out the differences that we've been through between you and Sightline.
No,
doesn't
sorry,
it?
that's the discursive aspect. The table
The
doesn't.
table
You're
doesn't,
quite-
because
no,
I was looking for them thinking.
no, I'm sorry, I've sent you on a
No,
fool's
that-
errand. That's my fault. It
No, that's
doesn't.
fine.
Absolutely
And
doesn't.
it may be useful when we produce this table that the inspector's going to have for him to see what some of the findings of Sightline and the LVIA say as well. Yeah, would you do that? Well, that might assist the inspector. Thank you. And I think even actually, and I don't take a particular point on it, but even in your text, you do mention some differences, but you don't mention all the differences we've been through in your discussion following on. And
I
look at the areas either.
I think the point there is the differences. The table is inclusive of differences with my judgment, sightlines, which I write. Minor and mainly related matters of susceptibility and sensitivity. And so if we do want to extend in that way, we probably have to go into the whole susceptibility and sensitivity piece if we're going to go the table in that fashion, because there are differences around all of that in terms of understanding. It is probably one of the most misunderstood pieces of Glivia, which is susceptibility.
Yeah. No, I'm
And
not.
it's a messy and sort of
I wasn't-
journey.
I wasn't asking about that. I was just really making the point that the table doesn't identify the
No, I've got that
differences.
point, but if we
And-
do
and-
that, whether we then need to look into that detail. So
Well,
I
you
think we
do
should
what you
march
think.
forward from here rather than go back to that. Otherwise, we'll have to go back to
Well,
susceptibility.
you do what you think's right. But I'm President. I've got a note. I've just the other point. Just really just a note of caution with the inspector when he does read your text about that, which follows on helpfully when you discursively, as Glivia says, you can absolutely do. Especially that doesn't actually pick up all the differences, residual or year one either. Picks up some of them, but it doesn't pick up all the ones we've been through. But so that's fine. We've got a note of them, and we've
But it does report on sightlines residual effect. It says, I can see it there, 4.45 sightlines residual effect, 4.50 sightlines residual effect. So that's the point, 4.55 sightlines residual effect. So it is there, it's discursive.
It doesn't mention all the initial year one effects actually.
No, but it's the residual.
But the year one effects are material to the decision maker as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you've made that point. Yeah, I understand.
Well, it's
that.
right, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Good. Now, so just standing back from the differences, we've got about 5 hectares of built development in the national landscape. Inspector can note we're broadly agreed so far as LCA 1 and 2 are concerned on a high, one instance high to medium sensitivity. Yeah. With the introduction of substantial built development, certainly in parts of LCA 1 and in LCA 2. Yeah. Yeah. In terms of the methodology that you adopt in the Sightline LVIA, which is pretty conventional, one combines sensitivity with magnitude of change, which, and just pausing there, we don't have magnitude of change in your table, but on any sensible view, so far as LCA 2 and at least part of 1 is concerned, the Northern Field is going to be a high magnitude of change, isn't it? Putting the houses on.
In 1 and 2, that's correct.
Yeah, thank you. So you combine what is a high, in one instance, high medium landscape sensitivity with a high magnitude of change. And we can look at the matrices in due course to see what you should get if you do that.
You can.
Okay. But at the very least, applying the matrices, that's going to, in each instance, or should result in a moderate to large magnitude of impact on landscape character, shouldn't it? Just applying the matrices.
So again, you can use the table, so you can use the matrices, but we shouldn't have reliance on the matrices. We don't have to use a judgment with it and discursive point.
Yes. Understood.
And
Fair
we're going to get to that because that's the thrust
Yeah,
of it.
yeah.
So, I mean,
Okay.
I think
Right.
actually, no, sorry, there's points on susceptibility. I feel we may have to go to susceptibility and to get to
Well,
sensitivity.
Now,
Because-
well, I'm sure you can be taken. I'm not going to ask you about that. I'm sure my
Okay,
own friend will pick
thank
that
you.
up if you want to. That's
Yeah.
that's his job, and by all means do that. But for great respect, I'm going to move on to that other point. Okay.
Of course.
Now, the findings broadly that Mr. Petra makes broadly accord with the findings that the previous inspector made as well. That's right, isn't it? I think the previous inspector might have gone a bit further, but they broadly accord with the previous inspector's judgment as well, don't they?
I don't think he ran through the Glivia table. He made judgments on various matters, but he didn't score them in that way.
Right, well,
So
we-
yeah, but broadly he got to
that's why I
negative
used
as
the word-
opposed to positive.
well, serious and fundamental harm in landscape terms.
As I said, not Glivia language, but emotive language.
I see. Okay. And And just, I mean, just trying to look at it overall in terms of LCA 1 and 2, 470 of your proof, page 37. So I think, in fairness, this is where you're doing us a little summary, aren't you, of so many copies of your proof. It's 37, forgive me. Yeah. Site character overall is the heading, so I'm thinking landscape terms. 470, it's clear that there is limited and localized resultant harm. This, I think you're referring to give context to the 22%, really there, aren't you?
Yeah. And the detail within that, obviously.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, we read the other paragraphs, but when we get to 470, clear there's limited and resultant harm, but this should be balanced against benefits, which rightly sees the harm moderated overall. So come on to the benefits which you talk about, but you're having done the assessment of those areas, your initial finding before you then take into account the benefits, which you go on to do, is a harmful one, low level, you say, for the reasons you've said, but nevertheless, it's one that is an adverse finding in broad.
We've identified harm. Yes, we have.
And so just pausing there at that stage, that's not going to be a finding which is either conserving or enhancing the national landscape or the landscape character that we're particularly concerned with, because although there are degrees between us, you've identified harm to that character on the site, haven't you?
So I have identified harm. Yeah, but then we have got sorry.
So am I right then, if given that you identified harm, pause it there, and I appreciate, and we'll come on to it, you come on to benefits, but to that extent, at that initial stage, having done the assessment of the site, even you can't be saying that there would be either a conservation or enhancement of the landscape character in those areas, can you?
So what we're saying is, no, I'd say that we've identified harm. It's there, it's before us, it's before.
So am I right in that proposition? By all means, caveat it.
So
that's
then
right.
within those areas,
Right.
within those, sorry, so yes, there is harm associated with the scheme and the built component.
That's not my question. We agree there's harm. My question is, in light of that finding, you can't be putting forward the proposition at that stage that the scheme is either conserving and or enhancing character of those areas where you found harm, can you? That's what I'm putting to you.
So my answer is yes, in relation to the green infrastructure plan.
Right.
And when I went through, I can't remember now whether it was in chief, I think it was in chief, we talked about no, it's actually in cross-examination. We talked about the iterations of the design through to the design addendum and how the design addressed commentary from the officers, for example, through improving the green corridors through LCA 1 and LCA 2. And those green corridors, they are the strips between the fields, are retained and enhanced.
Yes.
So they're conserved and enhanced. So your question was, even within that area, can you get to conserve and enhance? And in relation to those landscape features, landscape elements, you can.
But those are the benefits you take into account, aren't they?
No, you asked me if we can get to conserve and enhance.
No,
That
no.
was the question
No.
in relation to those parcels.
So let me put it again. I'm sure it's my fault. What I'm putting to you, we were looking at 470. You come to an initial conclusion broadly in relation to those areas of built development that there will be harm. We're going to go different degree of harm from we identify, and then you go on in due course to look at benefits and say this brings it up.
No.
But at that stage, having assessed the effects the way we described through the tables, at that stage you can't therefore be saying, it doesn't make any logical or rational sense to be saying that it therefore either conserves or enhances the national landscape or indeed the landscape character.
No.
Are you? That's right, isn't it?
So the built components, I'm saying get us to the harm in those ones. I can't move beyond that, even though we meet the criteria sheet, they're positive in terms of design attributes. But I'm saying the green infrastructure within those parcels and the green infrastructure plan can get to conserve and enhance. Yes.
All right. But you see, as we went through, Mr. Pullen, I think you actually helpfully agreed. So far as the LVIA is concerned, and I understand you to be adopting their methodology, design, for example, the way the relationship with spaces and things is all built into that initial findings of effects.
It's within there, and there are paragraphs.
Yeah.
I've agreed with that.
So when when Sightline or Mr. McDermott made his findings, which are materially higher than yours, that we've been through with the inspector, sometimes at the residual stage, sometimes at year one, he is assuming for the purposes of his assessment, it's a high quality design appropriate for the AONB. exactly what his methodology is. You built that in, baked that in already, and then he finds harm to those levels. That's right, isn't it?
But that's where the difference is between, he assumes that, yes, he does assume high quality design, of course he does, it's right, there's nothing between the parties, the council accept high quality design. But what I've done is I've looked at it through the lens of the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide
Yes.
and understood to the granular detail how the exceptionally high standards that are met.
Okay.
And therefore I can get through those GI components to conserve and enhance. Then I can understand how that bar is being
I'm
met.
just trying to understand the difference. Maybe there's another difference. So Mr. Petrus also confirmed he did, as the LVIA did. So both those experts, in coming to their findings on year one and then residual effects, which are different from yours in some respects, have already baked in design, absolutely crystal clear in the methodology that Mr. Bullen accepted and you've accepted. They assume it's going to be a high quality design appropriate for the natural landscape.
Yeah.
And yet we find these effects. Are you saying that when you find your effects, before you take into account various benefits you go on to, which we'll come on to, your findings, which are materially lower, haven't taken into design, or have they taken into design?
So coming back to Mr. Petro first, it already baked in. He didn't bake in again the Surrey Hills Environmental Design Guide. He didn't bake.
What
No,
you've
sorry,
done.
but
I
no.
want to ask what you've
you
done.
said Mr. Petro baked it in the design. So my point is, I have baked in design, yes, but I then looked through the lens of that document, and that's the difference between us in terms of the quality of the outcome. And the GI. I mean, I'm repeating myself here. So you can get to conserve and enhance with green infrastructure components through those parcels.
It's just double counting, isn't it?
It isn't double
because the
counting.
authors have already taken into account the highest quality
no,
design.
They haven't taken it into account.
Well,
in that
they
way.
both say they have. And look, so let's look at that design guide. You've mentioned it. I'm going to come on to it a bit later, but let's deal with that question now. As you raise it. So that is NID 720, I think, isn't it? I got that right? So let's, have I got that, if I've got that wrong, forgive me, I was going to come to it a bit later. I think it's 7, yeah, NID, so new inquiry document 720. Again.
Sorry, I will get there.
No, I will equally fail to get to documents quickly, no doubt, before we're finished. So it's
No, wrong one.
great sympathy.
720.
See, yeah,
I've got it.
NID, so
Yes,
it's just
I'm
the
there.
bizarre numbering we have at this inquiry. So if you've
Yeah.
got that, yeah. So again, the inspector's seen this a couple of times. I want to take really, but the proposition I want to put to you about this, that really this is a document dealing on the assumption that we've got built development and how, and you know, built development's happening, it's going to happen. This is how you should do it to make sure it's appropriate for the natural landscape. So again, it's sort of over, it's a stage on from where we are. That it's assumed you've got exceptional circumstances made out, you're going to build it. Here's what you should do to really accord with to help preserve the natural, that's its purpose, isn't it?
Well, we're told what its purpose is in terms of. This document sets out guidelines for conserving, enhancing country lanes and villages. Local planning authorities, it sets out principles and best practice considered managing country and blah, blah, blah. So that's what it is, principles, best practice.
And it's to do with the design of things. When you're going to build stuff,
Yeah.
when you're going to alter country lanes, this is, please take note of this. I mean, it's written by it's one of the board's documents.
Yes.
So they know all about this. We'll come on to see what the board say about this scheme, but we know that they've got this fully in mind.
Yes.
Mr. Smith, haven't they? So it's this horrific conflict with it. I'm sure they'll flag it up to us when we look at their consultation response. But what I'm suggesting to you is, and we've looked at section 3. If you look at section 3, it's called headed Building Design in the Surrey Hills. This is the point I think that Mr. Petro has taken to. No issue from the council on this. If you're going to build stuff, we say you shouldn't here because there's not exceptional circumstances and there's harm to landscape and so forth. If you're going to do it, yeah, these are a very good set of principles. So section 3, PDF page 8, building design in the Surrey Hills, the following principle should be adopted for all forms of development within the Surrey Hills A and B, whether inside or outside settlements or for large developments. Fantastic. Should refer to them in design and access statement, accompanying planning application, demonstrate how the proposal. So let me put it to you. This is giving you advice on how one should properly design stuff to accord with the particularly special context of in this case, a natural landscape. This is exactly the kind of, in other words, when the LVI took into account a high quality of design, and Mr. Petra assumes a high quality of design, they're assuming there's going to be a good design. This is a document giving particular guidance on good design in the national landscape.
I think the point is particular. So high quality is high quality, but this is particular.
Yeah.
And it's that well related. That's the difference that lies between us.
Sure, but
Yeah.
but I mean, there's got to be a crossover here because you're trying to build in a lot more. And I think the other two experts have already assumed a high quality design. That's the difference. Maybe that's the difference between us. But again, we'll look, because if you're right, the AONB board would presumably have great issues with this scheme, or give the scheme a big thumbs up for complying with this. But they don't do that. We'll come on and look at what because they're objecting, aren't they, to this scheme?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and it's relevant. We'll come on to look at the views both of Natural England, who are the authors of the GAL document you looked at, who object vehemently. We'll come and look at that in landscape and character terms, don't they? And also the AONB board, who also object vehemently in terms of the impact on the character of this site, which is the point I put to you from the outset, is what we should be looking at. It's right, they both object. Yeah, good.
And it's a principle.
And the
So it's
inspector
not-
should give their views weight, in your
Sorry,
view? Should the inspector?
it's an in principle objection as
Yeah.
opposed to an in detail objection. Going through
Right.
this documentation.
Well, look through Natural England and say they've been on the site, they've looked at it.
No, but in terms of the detail of documentation, detail of design, detail of those components and the response to this. So it's an in principle objection.
Okay, thank you. Now, yes, and to go back to your 417, to be fair to you, because the other part is I'm trying to understand your process, that you then, this is page 37 of your proof again. You've said the moderation results in an effect of the slight adverse to neutral overall. So, sorry, you find your harm, and then you say this has got to be balanced against the benefits, which rightly sees, in your view, the harm moderated overall. And just so I understand your process, that's when you, in your assessment, have taken into account the benefits that you see in other parts of the appeal site in LCAs 3 through to 7, amongst other things. You went through some of them in chief, but is that broadly right?
That's my overall site balance.
Yeah,
paragraph
it's the other
470.
things,
So LCA 182 score, LCA 37 score.
you
balance.
net them off.
I don't net them off, but I get to a negative. I
think you get to a positive, actually.
I
To be honest
don't.
with you. I mean,
No, I get to slight adverse to neutral
okay.
outcome overall. So I don't get to a positive.
Okay,
I get to
all right.
slight adverse to neutral overall.
All right, thank you.
An outcome that's not significant.
Even with those benefits, I see. Okay, slight adverse to neutral, fine. And so far as there's any adverse finding, again, overall, that can't sensibly be conserving and enhancing the natural
No,
landscape.
and we've gone to the conserving and enhancing point in relation to the duty. And we can go back to
Okay.
that.
All right. Okay, we will come on to the duty. Good, thank you. Now, just some contextual matters. The national landscape designation has led to agreement between the parties. I think that this site, the inspector should consider this site to be a valued one within the meaning of 187A of the MPPF, common ground. And the starting point, or one of the starting points for contextual matters when the inspector is considering the character of this site, is that it is considered to be, in policy terms, it's got the highest status and the highest level of protection so far as landscapes are concerned, I think, in government policy, isn't it?
It's a valued landscape. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's safeguarded, obviously, for the benefit of current and future generations. In principle, once national landscape or part of it is lost, it's lost forever. And that's something that government doesn't want to see happening.
Well, that's the duty. The national park
Yeah.
is that's its
Okay.
purpose.
And as we know, and some of this is obviously for Mr. Collins, but it's obviously important also for a landscape expert when assessing to understand the context. But the circumstances when you're assessing as a landscape expert and finding harm or benefits, the circumstances must be genuinely exceptional for proposals to be allowed. That's a number of moving parts to that, which is beyond the scope of your evidence.
That's what in the 190 territory.
But
and
one of the
proposed
elements,
Mr. Collins, yeah.
one of the elements, it touches on whether there's a detrimental impact on the landscape character and other matters relating to landscape.
C. Yeah.
And we know that great weight should be given to conserving and enhancing landscape and scenic beauty, again, as a matter of government policy.
Again,
So,
yeah, waiting is a matter that Mr. Collins did.
yeah. So the starting point and from a landscape assessment in terms of context and how you approach a given site is quite different from, I don't mean this nasty, it's a normal bit of countryside, which may well have development plan policy protection, but we're talking about a whole different level of protection.
The relativity of values. Yeah.
And as you know, and if you don't know, then I'll deal with it with others. But as I say, I mentioned it to you because I think it's important for a landscape expert to understand the context, that the government guidance is clear that the scale and extent, as it puts it, of development in these areas, national landscape should be limited. That's what the government says.
It does. At 189.
And that's because it places great weight. Well, this is actually the PPG, but it's the same point.
Same thing.
Set out Mr. Johnson's proof. And that's particularly because of the importance that the government gives in terms of conserving and enhancing what it refers to as landscapes and scenic beauty. It's in the PPG, yeah. And you understand that, and that's the
Yeah. So again,
Good.
I've gone to that I believe I've gone to that. I'd have to find that point
Okay.
within my evidence, but
and
again, limitation of scale and extent is a journey
Yeah.
that the scheme has gone on. And
And-
numerically,
Yeah.
locationally, that's exactly what has occurred.
so that context, the importance that the government gives, and in the context of delivering 1.5 million houses, it's the same context, is important context, isn't it, for landscape and visual assessments and judgments to be formed within.
It's part of the context.
Yeah. And again, in principle, we know there's an exceptionality test. In principle, the government have indicated in DPG that such areas, national landscape, are unlikely to be suitable areas for accommodating unmet needs from adjoining non-designated areas. That's set out in the PPG as well, isn't it?
I haven't got the PPG.
All right,
before
I'll
me,
deal with that
sorry.
with Mr. Collins. All right, be fair. You have dealt with what is now a strengthened duty from that which existed a year or two ago, the amended section 85. Again, some of that will be legal submissions, but we're all agreed. I think that so far as the statute refers to furthering the purpose of conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area, it's a strengthened duty from that which existed before a couple of years ago or so.
So I think that's a legal point.
At a legal point,
Yeah.
fine. How have you understood that have you formed a view whether it's a strengthened duty or had discussions about that?
I haven't formed a view.
You haven't formed a view.
No, and
All
I've
right.
gone through my responses in chief in relation
All
to
right.
that and the targets associated with it.
Okay, well, if you haven't formed a view, I won't ask you any more questions. It wouldn't be fair of me, but I will record you haven't formed a view. Now, again, I don't really want to go there unless we have to, because I'm going to make submissions on it, but you've quite fairly mentioned the guidance, two bits of guidance, actually. I think one relates back to the previous government, but the more recent one in NID 711, the DEFRA guidance from December the 16th of last year. Again, that indicates, we can go to it if we want, just for these propositions, that indicates a number of matters of to help a decision maker think about what the decision maker should do when considering this duty.
It does,
Basically,
yes.
and you've
And
fairly
I've
quoted and
run
read out
through
some
those.
matters and
Yeah.
make it. It also refers that it would be useful to discuss or at least consider the views of the board, the management board, when one's considering the duty, doesn't it?
I haven't read that particular paragraph.
Okay, well, let's
But I mean,
just
it-
just go to it. So if you it's 7.11 NID 7.11.
Yeah,
And the bit I'm referring to in particular is page 6 of 8 as numbered in the bottom paragraphs. What under a heading, what a relevant authority should consider. So relevant authority is the inspector for present purposes. And there's lots of stuff. And I'm now going to, sorry, forgive me, the reference, the wrong reference, page 4 of 8. You're going to get mad. Yeah, 4 of 8. So go up, when to apply the duty. It's the heading 4 of 8, number of bullet points. And then at the bottom of page 4 of 8, when seeking to further the purposes, relevant authorities should consider the information contained in the management plan, which you looked at. And then the next paragraph, relevant authorities should make efforts to understand the management plan and relate their functions to it. Dialogue with the protected landscape team, brackets, for present purposes, the Conservation Board can assist the relevant authority. And I suppose the dialogue this inspector has got the responses they've written in to the inspector to give their views to him on these matters.
I see that.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of them. Won't go through them all. We might look at some in a minute. Yeah. So that and what do you say? I mean, I'm not going to suggest, say Mr. Marici doesn't get excited. I'm not going to suggest that just because it's a representation from the board, it attracts necessarily weight because it's the board. But do you agree that the views of the board, as you've read and understood them, should be given weight by the inspector in this case?
I'm not going to talk about weight. That's
Oh,
from
okay.
Mr. Collins. But what I'm going to say here is I can see here that it says dialogue should occur.
Okay.
So I think that's right.
Okay.
But then that's in the balance of all the other points that have been raised in relation of there should be cognizance of the landscape management plan.
Yeah.
Then the points I went to is as far as it's reasonably practical, relevant authorities should seek to
Okay.
avoid harm and contribute to conservation. So the other points that I went through in chief. So again, it's looking not at single paragraphs, but the balance overall of what this document means.
And we know that part of the essence of this duty, as explained in the guidance, is not only avoiding harm to statutory purposes of protected landscapes, but also seeking to further the conservation and enhancement of the natural beauty of.
Again, I've read the words, but we're now seeking to go into legal matters and planning matters. So
Okay.
I think better addressed by
That's
us.
fine. Let's look at the management plan. CD 7.9. Again, a familiar document to the inquiry, I think. And again, I'll take it, if I may, fairly quickly. But again, I don't think it's an issue between us, and we know that the prime. Sorry,
No, I'm sort of old school bits of paper, but I'm getting there. I'm with you now.
So we've got, and I'll take this quickly because I think we've looked at some of these points before. We just sort of cross them with you. 1.9 on page 16 or PDF page 9, defining the natural beauty of the this particular National Landscape Inspector's face with. That's where we find in this document how it should be defined in this context. Is that right? Section 1.9?
So 1.9, yes.
Yeah.
But there is a section, yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then in terms of, if we just go to page 11, good, a couple of pages further on, we've got the statement of significance, haven't we, there, at para 2.2 on page 11.
Could I just go to page, I think I've got it as printed page 17, but it's, again, under your defining natural beauty of Surrey Hills A and B,
Yeah.
which is where you took me to 1.9,
Yeah.
and then the quote from Dr. Bannister, then you go across just before 1.10.
Yeah,
Of course, it does then describe there. The features are as follows. So
Yes.
features that define special character. And
Yeah.
of course, it lists them there under the bullet points: views, woodland,
Yeah.
heath, and so on and so on. Historic buildings.
Yeah.
So parkland.
Yeah.
So there's the breadth in there.
we've got a lot of those are characteristic of our site, aren't
Yeah,
they?
but again,
Woodland,
But it's just picking up the breadth of the built aspects.
Yes,
And then
but
at
there
the
are
same
certain-
point, now on 2.2 statements of significance, which is where you've taken me to.
Yeah, fine. So what was the point you were making about we're going to
Just-
come back and look at the key
Yeah.
features, but
We need to look in the round, so we need
Yes.
to understand the breadth of features within Surrey Hills National Landscape.
Absolutely.
That's the point.
and then 2.2 page 11 where I was going, statement of significance includes again a number of matters that the inspector may include are relevant to the site, including mention of a landscape mosaic of farmland, woodland, heaths, downs and commons, and it's emphasising, isn't it, particularly in relation to this natural landscape, the diversity of its characteristics. It's one of those natural landscapes that has a real diversity of characteristics within it.
This
That's part of
statement's-
its nature.
Yeah, the statement's within my evidence, and again, I give the full statement and conclude on the to explore market towns and picture postcard villages.
We
So
have, yes,
I read it all the way through.
and we have the reference at page 9. I've just crossed out sunken lanes, but there's a reference to country lanes, page 9. Right, good, thank you. And indeed, tranquility and parklands as being, as you pointed out, all aspects of key features of the national landscape that we're concerned with.
In varying degrees across the area. Yeah.
And page 33 of this document, PDF 17, hard copy page 33 is where we find the two particular policies, and the two ones that I think are in dispute between us, P1 and P2. P1 is the one that refers to when a decision maker's balancing different considerations in relation to planning applications, giving great weight to, quote, any adverse impact that the development proposal would have on the amenity landscape and scenic beauty of the A1B and the need for its enhancement. So that's relevant, I suppose, to the extent that the inspector finds any adverse impacts in light of the various evidence he's got before them and how he plays it with that policy. But that would be the relevant consideration in terms of that policy, wouldn't it? Whether there are any adverse impacts on, for present purposes, landscape and scenic beauty of the particular site we're concerned with.
Yeah, and the national landscape. So I address that, sir, at my table 4.0 on page 33 of my proof of evidence. And I say in relation to P1. I don't need to go through it, sir, but it's there. My answer's there for you to read through.
And again, similarly, P2 will require the inspector to take the findings and ask himself whether the special landscape character of the locality, giving particular attention to potential impacts on ridgelines, public views and tranquility. And again, he's got to focus, hasn't he, for the purposes of this proposal, on what he finds in relation to the current character as assessed and the evidence before him in the various parts that relates to this proposal.
Yeah.
That's the exercise. Yep.
And again, page 34 of my table 3 and the response in relation to P2
Yeah, good.
is at my table 3. Yeah.
Now, if we just turn up, please, NID 2, if you would, be so kind.
92.
Um,
First outing.
I can't think why. But NID 2 is the response of the the board.
I guarantee I haven't.
Can't believe you haven't gone to that already, Mr. Smith.
No.
Shocked.
NID.
NID 2. But we've
NID.
so which I've given you the correct reference, having told you that NID 2.3. Excuse me. No. Sorry, NID 2.2. There are a number of what might be categorised responses from the board. This particular one is dated the 30th of November 2024 and is from the chair of the board, Catherine Atkinson. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, is this 2.2 did you say?
NID 2.2.
2. Yes, I
Dated
got
the
that,
30th of November.
Yes, I
And
got that.
again, so this, as we all know, is from the board, chair of the board that writes some of the documents you've been relying on. And it's pretty clear in its view, isn't it? I mean, we won't go through it all, inspectors read it, but it certainly supports the previous inspector's position and refers in depth to the duty and how the author of this document thinks that duty plays in relation to this scheme. And it's, as I say, a pretty fundamental objection to this appeal, isn't it, from the chairman of the board that is the custodian of the document we've looked at, the management plan, and indeed the design document you rely on as well. That's right, isn't it?
I can see the objection. I can see the conclusion. I can see that on page 3 that it talks back to the previous inspector's decision.
Yeah.
And of course, my views differ to those of the previous inspector. So if they've depended upon that data to inform their response, then I can see why they may get to the outcome that
Well,
They do.
if you look at the bottom of page 2, about the penultimate paragraph, direct reference by the chair of the board to her management plan.
Yeah.
Reports to the inspector its statutory plan, therefore material planning consideration. Its preparation has been through the necessary statutory procedures. The appeal proposal is directly contrary to the thrust of the plan read as a whole, and more specifically planning policies P1 and P2, which you just looked at. Couldn't be clearer.
So that's their view. That
Yeah.
again, I was just looking through for a reference to the design guide. I don't see that, but
No,
no.
that rather accords with the view that I'm putting to you that it's not really going to assist. Because perhaps they appreciate these matters are baked into assessments and we're really concerned with other issues. I mean, that might explain why Mr. McDermott didn't mention it, the board don't mention it, Mr. Petro doesn't mention it. I mean, you're the only person that does.
No. Mr. Pullen mentions it. I mentioned it.
Well,
and,
Mr.
and the
Mr.
and it's been produced by the National Landscape as a piece of guidance on
Yes.
how to develop,
It's produced by
on how to develop.
produced by the very author of this letter.
I don't think this
Reported.
particular person produced it, but the organisation.
She's the
yeah.
chair of the board.
That's a non-point between us, but yes, I'll take that.
Can we look also, when we're looking at the board representations, we've seen, and we won't need to go to this, there's a recent email which we've already looked at from Mr. Smith, dated the 11th of March, which I hope has now made it onto a list. There's that email from him, from Clive Smith. But let's also go to CD 3.10, as we haven't looked at that yet. That's going back to the core documents, 3.10. So it's an email from Mr. Smith,
I have that, yeah.
19th of September,
Dear Kate.
2022, dear Kate. The proposals are clearly contrary, he says, to the AONB planning policy set out in the NPPF, the local plan, Surrey Hills management plan. Then he talks about the scale and so forth, takes a view on exceptional circumstances, and then makes some particular points about landscape character, doesn't he? And talks about the own intrinsic landscape value and so forth, providing setting. Now, the inspector will, of course, read and see what he says, but he is, as I'm suggesting to you, is the right approach. Taking a view, making an assessment against the character of the site as one finds it now, which is undeveloped greenfield land with particular qualities. So if you look on page 3, he says that development would clearly undermine the special landscape character of the locality. And all of his comments and views given to the inspector are directed at the potential existing character of this part of the national landscape that this site covers, which is the correct approach to take, isn't it? That's right, isn't it?
So I was trying to go through the letter. I haven't.
Sorry,
read this in
I'm
detail.
Have you seen this before? Well, I'm sorry, I'd assume, have you had a chance have you ever seen this letter?
I have seen this. It's
Right.
within my document. I printed it and placed it there,
Yeah,
but have I
that's
read
what-
it forensically? I'm afraid I haven't.
No,
So-
I'm my fault. I'm trying to rush at the end of the
Yeah,
day. So
yeah.
don't be rushed. If you want to
Yeah.
have a look at it, you must have a look at it. But I mean, that's really what I'm putting to you. And of course, you disagree with him, but I'm suggesting to you it is pretty relevant that he's raising, as he puts it, serious concerns, particularly in the landscape character and visual context, which is your area, which is why I'm
No,
and from a member of the organisation which publishes documents that you, to a large degree, rely on as supporting your case. That's really why I'm putting it to you.
Sorry, I would have to read it in more detail.
Well, look, I look.
But I
I'm going to
understand.
assume. I'm going to assume you disagree with it. I'm
Yeah,
not going to.
yeah.
I'm not going to make a submission that you didn't
yeah.
disagree with it. I
But-
assume you do. I just wanted to put to you that
But I
this is
agree,
a-
he's
yeah.
a person from that, a planning advisor to the AONB, so I understand that.
Yeah,
where
all right.
this is
That's
coming
very good. Thank you very much indeed. And just to complete the circle of what the inspector may consider are relevant, particularly relevant responses, can we look at, if you can go back to the NID documents, NID 2.3, which is the natural England response. Response for the purposes of this appeal. reappeal. So that, just to give that context, that's the one. I cunningly can't find the date. Well, it's responding to the consultation made on 5th of September 2024. So it's after that. So again, have you had a chance to read this response in detail?
I have read this one, but not in detail, I'm afraid. But
Okay.
yeah.
And the reason I put this to you, and again, we don't need to go through detail because you haven't read it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Inspector will obviously look at it. You've mentioned the GAO document, which of course Natural England is the author of.
Yes.
And the particular, obviously Natural England deal with matters relating to SANG, but they also, as you mentioned, deal with other matters relating to natural landscapes. And you can see the summary in their box on page 1. They object for those reasons, because they think it will have a significant impact on the purposes of designation of the AONB, and that, as we know, is preserve natural beauty and so forth, and result in what they characterise as a direct and irreversible loss of designated land. And I mean, to put it, what they do, and the inspector can look at it in due course, but they then go on, there's quite an in-depth objection based on landscape and landscape matters, which follows every several pages. It's quite a sort of detailed bit of work. It appears to be starts on the basis they've done several site visits, and there's a commentary. So, in view of time, we won't go through all that in detail. It's there. I'm putting it to you because what I'm suggesting to you is that there is another relevant consultee, in fact, the author of some of the documents you pray in aid, who's making a pretty clear objection to this inspector on landscape and visual grounds, and have set it out in some detail as to why they think this scheme is objectionable and harmful. Is that fair?
I understand the source
Yeah.
of the document.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Good, thank you. And again, you know, if they, because your line of argument with GAO, well, you know, natural beauty covers a whole range of things, covers buildings. I mean, if you know, they understand what GAO does, they understand those points, but they've taken what I'm going to suggest to you is the correct approach, which is to assess what is there now in terms of the character of the undeveloped land, and form a view as to what's proposed and whether it's harmful, put it in line with the tests they've got to apply, both in policy and in statutory tests, and form their view. That's the process they've done, reporting to the inspector.
Well, we differ
Yeah.
slightly, but I agree that that's the process they have
All
done,
right.
yes.
So I'm going to move on to another topic. I don't know whether you or anyone else would like a break, or whether you want me to push on. I'm happy either way.
I'm fine, so you want to carry on? So-
I'm content to carry on.
Good, thank you.
Thank you then.
No, not at all. Character assessments, I think we can deal with this quite briefly. We're agreed that the appeal site is characteristic, I think, of the Hindhead Wooded Green Sand Hills, catchy name, landscape character area. That's LCA GW5 in the Hankinson Duckett study.
Yes, displays characteristics.
Displays
of that
characteristics of
character
it.
area, yeah.
And again, these at this level, even at those levels that we're dealing with quite broad areas, we can go to it if we need to, but because the inspector's looked at it a number of times, for his note, it's core document CD 710, and that identifies GW5 and the key characteristics to it.
Yeah.
If we need to go, we can, but
We've gone through it in.
we have. So just let me put some short points. It's fair to say that to the extent this is going to be helpful, because I'm going to suggest that I think that they're only peripherally helpful, these studies, but GW5 is characterised by a complex and heavily wooded topography, from memory, dotted with smaller scale fields. That's one of the characteristics that's
One of
identified.
them, yeah, or two of them.
And particularly, it effectively, as the inspector will see when he looks at it, it wraps around Hazelmere. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so if it may help, we just perhaps go to a paragraph for your reference again, to not go to it at length now, but I do refer to the document as well, so
Yeah.
we may help subsequently. I refer to it in my paragraph 3.18 as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
If we need to go to it, we can, and you've helpfully set out some parts.
yeah.
So I don't think it's one of the characteristics, again, except there are a number, but one of the matters it highlights is the lack of accessibility to GW5, and that's a characteristic of it as it happens.
it does.
Yeah.
State that point, yeah.
Yeah, a key characteristic. And it notes, among other things, the heavily wooded character, including, I think it mentions from memory, extensive areas of coniferous plantations as being a characteristic of the area as well.
Yes, well, I'd have to go to that detail, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. The inspector can look at it and we can make submissions on other points that are written there. The AMEX study, again, we've looked at that, again, for the inspector's note, I don't think we need to look at it, but it's NID 7.24. The particular segment that our site with is in HE05A. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And I think there was this point, and I wasn't quite sure from when Mr. Petro has been examined, but I'm right that area covers areas that are some of which are outside the national landscape, some are in.
Yes, it stretches
Yeah.
across, and your point was about Scotland Park.
Yeah, so I mean, that's an
Yeah,
example where I
supplies, yeah,
think,
but-
so it's not, just got to bear that in mind. So when it describes, as you say, the landscape value as medium, but frankly, it covers a much larger area than the appeal site. It goes and assesses areas which are not in the national landscape as well as areas that are. These kind of assessments are really going to only help the inspector at a very general level, aren't they, in truth? Not least because we've got the benefit of your evidence and others' evidence looking at a much more drilled down areas and character assessments.
And again, sir, probably for balance to that, I have that in my proof at paragraphs 3.19 to 3.22,
Good.
which runs through that, and my conclusion that we went through earlier today at 4.101.
Good. Now, when we get to the site itself and the landscape character areas that the inspector has lots of information on and evidence, lots of assessments, can I just pick out some points from them, which hopefully we can agree, some of which the last inspector recognised. And I want to see if you think he's right, and which Mr. Petro have also considered. So far as the site is concerned, it's fair to say that when the inspector looks at the various characteristics and key matters set out in the management plan and the landscape character assessments, there are some divergences he would find on the appeal site, as the last inspector recognised. So, for example, there are some what might be characterised as distinctly human interventions. The tennis court springs to mind as one. And because the northern fields are next to development, both extant and some being built, and the western areas next to what is quite a busy road, there are certainly in those parts of the site what the last inspector characterised as qualified areas in terms of peacefulness and remoteness, that there are areas where there is other things happening. And that's a fair characterisation, isn't it?
Well, we've got to the point about tranquility is diminished to the roadside, tranquility, perception, tranquility diminished in relation to the properties at Scotland Close. Yeah, so the urban edge is very apparent from those two top fields. Yeah.
And yes, good. Now, so far as the Midhurst Road is concerned, it's as a landscape feature, and that particularly running along where the site access is proposed, that area, that stretch before and going up towards Hazelmere, it would be fairly characterised, wouldn't it, as a country lane with tree lining, canopies either side of it. That'd be a fair characterisation.
Tree lining?
Yeah.
Agree with that.
Country lane?
Yeah, I think urban fringe is where we're at.
I see. Okay, maybe there's a difference there between
There's
us.
a difference there, yeah.
And insofar as the site in parts, I mean, it's been characterised in various ways, but some people have characterised as having a parkland feel. It's got woodland areas. Would you some parts of the site have a parkland feel? Would you agree with that?
No, I don't think we're
No?
at that stage as yet.
You don't think that? You call it agricultural? How would you characterise the green spaces?
I don't give it that definition. It's pasture and it's woodland at the moment.
Pasture.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And pasture and woodland are again certainly woodland features identified as key characteristics of this part of the national landscape.
They are, yeah.
The site doesn't have particular accessibility at the moment. Some, but not much, I think.
Yeah, that's correct.
And again, to that extent, it's characteristic of GW5, as mentioned in the Surrey landscape guide we talked about a moment ago. Remember, we agreed that was a characteristic.
It's a characteristic. It has Yeah, that you could say that.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely has limited accessibility at the moment. I agree with that
Yeah.
point.
And to an extent, I suppose it's fair to say that that limited accessibility, characteristic as it is of the area, contributes to what sense of tranquility there might be within the inner parts of the site.
Well, I guess if there's less people having quiet enjoyment of the countryside, it could be that little bit more tranquil. So
Quite. I mean, compared with those sort of scouts running around and having a good time, quite a lot more
Well,
natural, I'd have thought.
I don't know. I haven't
No.
done the studies, but
No. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. And of course, in terms of recreational activities, there's a slight distinction from national parks, isn't it? Because national landscapes, when they're designated, this is where we may need to get back to Geld, I hope we don't, but as a principle, they're not designated on the basis of recreational opportunities that they may offer, are they? They may well fulfill in due course a recreational role, but the designation criterion for national landscapes doesn't include recreational opportunities they offer, does it?
so no.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the management plan tells us to enhance recreation.
Yeah.
The Surrey Hills Environmental Guide Design Guide tells us to enhance recreation. Policies tell us to do that, and then the recent targets set out by DEFRA talk about recreation education facilities. So
Sure.
I think a bit of a journey's been undertaken there from those origins to where we are now.
Yeah, and the journey of the board, the management board.
I don't think a journey in how national landscapes are to be enjoyed and
No.
about recreation should be enhanced within them.
Yeah. And when the inspector sees the site on his site visit, he will observe, won't he, that for most of the site, human interventions are conspicuously absent. They're relatively slight when he walks through the site.
Yes, I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah.
There's there's the silvicultural woodland, which you say is human intervention.
Yeah.
Another one, other than the sort of
You've got
parts of land management.
you've got the domestic influence of Red Court, to be fair, in LA7.
Yeah,
Which
you've got
is-
the urban edge to the north, and you've got
Yeah.
the pylons in LCA 5 to the south.
Sure.
So
But for a lot of the site, human interventions are relatively slight and not there. He'll see. I mean, the matter, I'm just putting it to you,
Yeah.
he'll form his own view,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, so far as LCA 1 and 2 are concerned, they're fields, paddocks, whatever you want to call them, but they're relatively commonplace in the national landscape. Would that be fair?
And increasingly so with its
Yeah.
expansion. Yeah.
They sit alongside woodland, and of course, much of the site is wooded in various forms, which is again another key characteristic of some of the landscape studies, particularly the Surrey one, isn't it? Wooded areas with fields. Yeah. And I think it's the LVIA. I can't remember, but somewhere in your documentation, LCA 1 certainly alongside the Midhurst Road is characterised as high quality agricultural landscape. Maybe you don't agree with that. I think that's the way Mr. McDermott put it.
I'm not sure it's high quality. I haven't looked at the.
Right,
I must
okay.
say I haven't looked at agricultural land values.
All right,
So
okay,
I wouldn't want to qualify that.
And so far, again broadly taking it quickly, when the inspector sees LCA 4 and parts at least of LCA 3 for my apparently illegal site visit, what were known to me, that they're pretty extensively wooded, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Some trees in LCA 7, not that many, but some. And so far as the inspector will see some areas of coniferous plantations on the site, again, that's one of the key characteristics that's been noted in the Surrey landscape character assessment, isn't it? Within this area.
But LCA 7, that's to go actually.
Okay, now, so far as the topography of the site, it's quite it's got slopes, it's got a ridge. It has a distinctive undulating complexity, as I recall the last inspector put it, which is reflective of what one finds in this part of the national landscape.
It does have the undulating topography, yes.
So we've got the northern fields represent effectively part of the ridge at the top, which the inspector will see. They're notably higher than we've heard from actually from Scotland's Close. They sit above them.
They sit just above.
Yeah, then you've got the ridge
yeah.
and then you
the
drop
woodland
down.
is the high point
Yeah.
that sits higher above that. Then it
And-
drops down to the south.
Yeah. So can I mean, I hope not unfairly, we've been through some of the key ones, that overall the site is in many regards very consistent with the characterisation of the landscape in both the management plan and also the Surrey landscape assessment.
It has attributes, yeah.
Yeah,
they're called
okay,
it,
thank
yes,
you.
it does.
There's been talk, and the inspector will see, and I saw some planting that has taken place, I think probably since the last appeal. Is that right, on the site, or maybe before the last appeal?
Well, a
Near
little bit of
Scotland's
both. There's
Close?
some recent planting
Yeah.
as well, so, yeah.
I see. And I don't think there's any disagreement between us that that would serve to enhance some of the characteristics in the northern fields of the national landscape.
The planting of trees
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
an enhancement, yeah.
Do you have instructions that those trees will be removed if this appeal's dismissed?
I don't have such instructions, no.
There's no evidence that they will be. whether or
I
not
don't
this
have
appeal
such
is allowed.
instructions.
No. Okay. Would it be fair, in your view, to proceed on the basis they'll remain even if the appeal's dismissed? You've got no
Well,
instructions to the contrary?
I don't know one way or the other. I mean,
Okay.
it's up to the client.
Okay, and
make
so
that decision.
this site has been designated now for is it over 66 years. And, you know, quite apart from the characteristics we've been through, it's plainly has become valued, as the inspector will have seen from a lot of the responses he's had to the appeal. And I think, again, as the last inspector put it, and I'm going to suggest correctly, it's become imbued with a perceptual sense of quality over time.
Well, I understand the local value,
Yeah.
but the value attributed to it is as we've got the valued landscape and the values within my
Okay.
judgment.
Right. Now, just this point, it's and I don't wish to downplay it but it is regularly run at the appeals. I suspect the inspectors at this point argue before him many, many times. When you've got a part of a site next to existing development, on the one hand, you could say that creates a different context for the site. On the other hand, you could say, well, actually, it's very important that we have that break. And there's got to be a point somewhere because otherwise developers will keep building and
Where
then
does it
saying, well, the
stop?
characters change to the next bit and the characters change to the next bit. So
Yeah.
it's a well-trodden path that this inspector would have had argued before him. But what we can note here is that the site up towards Scotland's Close and where what's called phase one, or I don't think it was called phase one in the application documents, but it's now called phase one. That's not in the national landscape. Is it? No. And what we've got is a demarcation. We've got a clear start of where the national landscape is, where development ends, either existing or development that's been built near to completion. It's plain, it's understood by the local residents that that's where the landscape begins. And that's important in terms of context to understand that, isn't it?
But I think to take your point about, so yeah, it is important to understand context, but to take your point, I mean, we can go to any of the plans actually, but perhaps we go to figure 36 within my proof, page 20.
Yep. Excuse me. Sorry.
Of course, you've said that we've got page 20, sir, figure 36.
Yeah.
I just picked a figure that shows the master plan in the background.
Yes.
You can see there that, and we've talked about the topography, we've talked about the woodland. And
Yeah.
earlier in chief, I said the trees. So if you look along the north of Parkland Country Park, the trees there, you know, sit on the embankment and are up to in excess of 20 metres tall. The woodland itself then sits above and holds the skyline. And of course, the woodland then, and where the forest school is, the land is then all the time, and through the parkland itself, the land is all the time falling away to the south. So what holds where the development goes is, so we can keep moving outwards and outwards and outwards, I think was your suggestion, or development could, and it's a typical thing that's talked of. Well, no, because we have the woodland that's been held in perpetuity, and it's being put into the sands. We've got the parklands that's put into the Lem. And of course, then we've got the topography that drops down the slope. So those two components together mean that A, the site is as visually discrete as it is, and B, that actually there's the full stop that we're seeking. And that is the end. And of course, if you look at how the development fits with the settlement pattern that we went back to, to its eastern edge, it fits with sort of southern advancement of Redcourt Lodge as a line. And then in terms of Scotland Close, it then, it like hugs Scotland Close, it turns the corner northwards up towards Hazelmere.
Okay, thank you. Right. Can I just move on to, just in the interest of time, and just some of your approach to some of the benefits?
Yeah.
And can I just start, just as a point of reference on your proof? We had a page 43, summary conclusions, 6.6.
Page 43.
Because, let's let you get there.
Yeah.
There may be other places, but this seems to be a useful summary of your approach, because what you're telling us there, 6.6, you refer to the 22%, the 78%. It's the 78% to achieve other beneficial attributes that the scheme brings, a significant amount of tree planting, the enhancement of the woodlands, new wetland habitats, new grassland habitat, overall significant increase in biodiversity. You refer to the LEMP and the CMP. So that's a little summary, as I understand it, of the benefits you've taken into account in that sort of stage 2 of your exercise.
Yeah,
Is
that's
that right?
And I should have collected recreation into that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's the reason I asked that is because I think in chief you were mentioning scout huts and
Education
other
facilities.
stuff, and I can work out how that fitted into that list. So you're going a bit beyond that list to take into account other things.
And in chief, I ran through the list of the benefits, but as you've
All right.
written there is what I've taken forward.
Yeah.
But then I've gone through those benefits in relation to the protected landscape targets.
So that's you take them into account. You make a further reduction and come to your overall finding on landscape and visual effects. As I understand it, you've taken them into account, and then you pass the baton on to Mr. Collins.
A further reduction. So I do my 78, like my balance overall to get to the slight.
Yes, exactly.
But
You've got
yes.
you've assessed your harm at LCA 1 and 2, but
But it's not a further reduction. So
what you've
I
said
got
is
to
that
the
actually-
outcomes. I got to the outcomes in the table.
Yeah.
But I didn't do I then didn't reduce them further to do the balance. I then put the two together and it arrived at a balance, but there was
I
no
see. Okay,
further
well,
reduction
right,
beyond
okay.
that.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Maybe I've misunderstood it, but
Yeah.
having found because you've taken them into account, all those benefits beyond that, recreational benefits, the whole
Yeah.
shebang to get to your overall findings on landscape and visual effects.
Yeah. the
You've then
slight
passed that on to Mr. Collins for him to stick into his planning balance
into his balance.
and all the other matters.
Yes.
So it's obviously important Mr. Collins doesn't count those benefits again in his balance when coming to a conclusion, because you've already done that. Some of the matters that you talk about in terms of the biodiversity and planting, am I right? I mean, a lot of that will be part and parcel of the SANG provision that you're proposing, won't it?
That's right.
So, I mean, if to the extent and helpful that you've recorded, you've taken that into account in your exercise and assessment, we shouldn't then in due course be taking that in account again, should we, as another benefit? I mean, it's not a matter for you, but,
No, but
really what the matter for you is you've taken those into account, those matters that will be constituent parts of the SANG in your assessment. Is that right?
mine is a journey to value.
Right, well, put about the journey.
Yeah,
Did
and
you-
then
you're-
the
you've
others,
taken-
no, sorry. So I get, mine was my value change. That's how I get to my outcomes of effect.
yeah.
But then, of course, the biodiversity aspects are dealt with by the ecologists.
Sure, but you've taken in, as you see it, there's
But
benefits.
the landscape is capable of facilitating their positive outcomes. That's what I'm saying. The landscape changes in character. That was the point.
Yeah.
So it's a change in character.
Really, the
They
point I
bring
just
the
want to, and I think we're agreed, was just, it's not always done this way. You've done it. I just want to understand it. That you've taken into account those list of benefits which you've added to in arriving at your overall views, which you've then reported and handed on to Mr. Collins.
within 6.6, you can see what I've taken
Yeah,
into
well,
account.
when we know there are some additions to that, for example,
Yeah.
the Scouts Hut and recreational stuff, which you've also taken into account. Yeah, is that fair?
Yeah, it's fine.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. Now, I reckon I've got about half an hour more, so are you happy for me to carry on?
Is that a natural, I'm sorry, is that a natural break
The-
point?
the-
that you've just come
well,
to?
I'm going to move to a new topic. So I suppose the honest
I mean,
answer is
I'm conscious that
yes.
there are going to be some questions from the Rule 6 party and then doubtless some re-examination, i.e. we're here tomorrow.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, not at all. We're always here tomorrow. I'm just thinking that if that's a natural break point,
Well, it
then-
is. It is.
let's break.
Okay.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
Right.
That's fine. It's
Sorry.
fine with me. Yeah.
I thought it might be, yes.
You don't want
Okay.
to speak to Mr. Marici every night, I get that.
Let's adjourn then,
Thank you very much for that,
9:30
it's
tomorrow
appreciated.
morning.
Thank you, sir. It's the other one.
It's the other one.
We had one on the river and one by the lake or something.
That's where I am. Is it? Well, that's where we are. Yeah, because we got thrown out the other one. No, we were thrown out. I really wanted to find sped up, but we're going to get too excited.
So I'm in the corner somewhere at the inn on the lake. That's where I am. Thank you, sir. That will be interesting.
I always sit in hotel restaurants looking around, witnesses, barristers and.
We all sort of disperse, don't we? Yeah. Oh. Let's